I think this is a real important class, and I'm not sure whether the best time for this class is first or last. Either way, it's good because you've been spending week after week after week learning stuff about plants and how to do this and that with them. But this is when you actually think about a plant as an organism, as a living thing with its own needs and its own parts. So very often I hear questions during this presentation that indicate that you learn something from this presentation and you learn something from that presentation, and it's like, oh, that's how those things go together. So that's kind of the purpose of a lot of what we're doing here, is to put those together. Now, let's see what the most convenient way to...
You've got a clicker right there. Yes.
Yeah, there. The clickers are great, except you can't use the little red dot on the screen. Now I still have to go point to it. And, okay, we call this lesson Botany 50.5. If you recall, in college, your introductory class is always, whatever it is, 101. Well, this is half of that. Okay, so this is Botany 50.5 for Master Gardeners who aren't quite up to Botany 101. Although you may find that you really probably are ready for it after all of the different things that you've studied. Here's the premise that I started with. Gardeners, that's y'all and me. Gardeners are inherently interested in plants, but may lack background knowledge about them. Botanists may know many technical details about plants, but may be unfamiliar with the practical applications of their knowledge. I had several botany professors in college. They couldn't have grown a flower bed if they had to. You know, they knew all about this serious biochemistry about plants, but they had no practical knowledge. And on the other hand, I've met people who all they've done is grow a garden for 50 years. They know everything there is to know about growing a vegetable garden. Can they explain it on a scientific level? No. No. But they've got all the practical knowledge you could ever want. You can learn something from both of those people, you know? Okay, we're going to have 3 parts to our lesson today. Lesson 1 is the shortest, and we're going to be talking about classification. Then the second lesson is going to be on anatomy, the body of a plant. That's real important. A lot of practical applications for gardeners about that. And lesson 3 is the physiology, how a plant operates. So let's start with lesson 1. The diverse world of plants. I took that picture in my yard several years ago. And it includes some moss growing on a rock. It includes wild violets. A very nice little grass ground cover that turns out to be not native, but it's everywhere. Some more native little vines. And of course, that stuff is what we call polka dot plant. And I'm sure I got it at Bobo's. And there's a fern up there. So look at the diversity right there in that little 3 square feet of plant. Most of the time when you're looking at a natural environment, you're going to see diversity. It's very rare in nature to see a big area with only one kind of plant growing in it. And usually if you see that, it's a non-native invasive plant. Native plants very seldom do. The first step in wisdom is to call a thing by its correct name. Taxonomy is the study of naming and classifying. Almost all the time, when we get together and start talking about plants, just like we were. We talked about loofahs and we talked about this other red plant. We didn't use anything but common names. That's what we use most of the time. But actually they're not sufficient in every situation. Here's a plant. That's about what it looks like right now, or it did a few weeks ago. It's a shrub. Has these very brilliant berries in the fall. Do you know what to call that?
No.
It's out in the woods. It's a native. What do you call it?
I have that plant.
Hmm?
I have that plant. I transplanted it, but it didn't grow berries this year.
Okay.
It's close to the house.
And it didn't bother you that you didn't know the name of it?
No.
Well, I'm going to tell you a name for it.
Okay,
All right.
please.
Now, when I was a kid,
Right.
I learned from my grandparents that this was French mulberry
Fresh milk.
or Spanish mulberry, either one. But guess what they call it now? When you go to the nursery to buy it, they call it beautyberry. Beautyberry. Now, I wonder if there's any connection between this plant going from just being a wild plant to being in the horticultural trade, and the shift from being French mulberry to being beautyberry. I mean, which one would you rather buy? Something that sounded like
Beauty.
mulberry? That's kind of trash some places.
Mm.
Or beautyberry. Okay, so if I don't know that now it's called beautyberry, and I'm talking about French mulberry, we might not be communicating. So a lot of times common names are great if we could all settle on one of them, but most of the time we don't. Different groups of people, different ages of people, different parts of the country, they'll call things different names, and it can get kind of confusing. Many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, a great scientist in Europe figured out a scheme for classifying every living thing. And his way of doing it was to divide the living world into groups, and then divide each group into groups, and each group into group into group into group, until finally you got down to exactly one kind of creature. And in school, we teach kids and make them memorize kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, variety. Now, that still works after hundreds of years. It still works. But botanists have been unwilling to just leave it alone. And botanists tend to put in more subgroups along the way. As gardeners, we don't need to worry about that. We don't. When we get interested in the levels of classification, our interest usually starts right about there. Family, genus, species, and variety is where, as gardeners, we tend to focus our interest. But let's, just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and start at the top with the plant kingdom. What is it that makes something a plant? Now, when I was in school, there were two kingdoms. My high school biology book would have listed two kingdoms, plants and animals. we've rethought that too. Now there's plants and animals. Fungus has a kingdom of its own. Little microscopic organisms have 2 or maybe 3 kingdoms of their own. We say that taxonomists have 2 different philosophies. Some of them are lumpers, like to put a whole lot of things in very few groups. But most of them are splitters. They like to take groups and break them apart, break them apart, break them apart. So we've broken apart the old-fashioned 2 kingdoms, and now we recognize several. But, of course, plant is still one of them. So, as a master gardener, you ought to be able to recognize a plant. How is it that you know that something is a plant? There's actually a list of, if it's this, 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 and this, it's a plant. What are those things? First of all, it requires a microscope to know this, but it is eukaryotic, which is a big word that means the DNA, the genetic material, is in a nucleus within each cell. Now, a little later, we're going to talk about a plant cell and its parts and how it works. But for right now, let's just say eukaryotic, the DNA is in a nucleus in every cell. And that is an advanced characteristic. You are also eukaryotic. Your DNA is in nucleus structure of your cells. It is multicellular. So we're talking about things that are not just little individual microscopic cells. It is multicellular. Around each cell in its body, there is a layer called the cell wall. And that cell wall is constructed of a particular material called cellulose. And plants, with a few really weird exceptions, plants are autotrophs. They make their own food, their own nutrients within their bodies. An amazing, amazing ability. That's photosynthesis. And we're going to talk about that in the 3rd lesson. So, if you are a eukaryotic, multicellular organism with cellulose cell walls and you're making your own food, you're a plant. Let's look at that picture. All right? The grass up there. Is it a plant? Well, yeah, you didn't have to come to class to know that. Of course it's a plant. But it's a plant because it's a eukaryotic multicellular thing with cellulose cell walls making its own food. That's why it's a plant. What about that log? Well, it used to be a plant, right? It's decaying now. But what about those mushrooms?
No.
They're not. They're not. See, they have their own kingdom. And they're not plants because they are, well, yes, they're this. Yes, they are that. Oops, they're not this. They have a cell wall, but it's made out of a different chemical. And they're not making their own food. This mushroom is getting its nutrition out of that old log. So they don't get to be plants. Not anymore. Gardeners and nature celebrate the diversity of plants. And probably the lessons that you have had a chance to have in this class have given you an idea of the breadth of the plant kingdom, because you had an opportunity to learn about grass and lawns, right? And did you have a tree? You had a tree thing, and so and you've had the propagation thing and the herb thing, and so you've got a good idea of how this works. And as I told you, very rarely in nature will you see a big area with only one kind of plant in it. That's usually going to be either an invasive that has taken over an area, or it's a cultivated area and it's a monoculture because somebody is in charge of it. When we try to classify plants, there's a few simple questions that we start with. And the first question that we ask, does it have well-organized vascular tissue? Now, vascular tissue is tissue that carries fluids through a body. Your vascular tissue is your arteries and your veins. Okay? Does the plant have that? Yes or no? If it doesn't have it, then it's one of the simpler kinds of plants. More advanced plants do have it. If you don't have a way to move liquids up and down in your body, that really limits you. You might not be able to grow in the same kind of environment, or you might not be able to get very big. So, moss, a very primitive, simple plant, does not have vascular tissue, but that tree that got cut down by a beaver, and by the way, the beavers are back on my place. They are cutting down trees that are this big. They better stop soon. All right, that tree had lots of vascular tissue. Now, another question, how does it reproduce? Does it reproduce by making spores or making seeds? Spores are microscopic, single-celled reproductive structures that we associate with mosses and ferns. Seeds can be large and contain an embryo and nourishment for the tiny plant. Think about the last time you cooked beans, okay? That's a pretty big seed. Inside of it is an embryo, and it'll sprout and it will nourish that little tiny plant from what is in that seed. The spore has got to start nourishing itself immediately. There's no stored food for it. So, mosses and ferns make spores. Have you ever seen a fern that on the back side of the leaf there were lots of little brown dots?
Mm-hmm.
People see that and they think that fern is sick. Well, it's not. It's making spores. That's just part of its way of making the next generation. So mosses, no vascular tissue, and make spores. Ferns, vascular tissue, still making spores. More advanced plants have vascular tissue and make seed. If you're not dealing with a moss or a fern, you're dealing with an advanced plant. Those advanced plants, of course, they're put into various groups. And one really important group that gardeners don't deal with very much is a group called Gymnosperms. Now, Gymnosperms include some things that might be familiar to you. A cycad. Cycads, common name of the cycad that you might have seen or maybe even had is a sago palm. A sago palm, wouldn't recommend it for around here. They're not cold hardy enough. They're expensive to buy, and if they make it through a winter, you're actually lucky. but they're beautiful, but they're a little too tropical to be around here. Ginkgos make a beautiful, beautiful tree. They stink, but they make a beautiful tree, especially in the fall, a lot of beautiful color. And conifers. Now, conifers make cones. What's some examples of a conifer? Pine, spruce, fir, cypress, juniper, cedar. What is the most common conifer in Leon County? Cedar.
Yeah.
There's some pine trees. The farther east you go to the edge of the county, the more pine trees you're going to see. But cedar is our most common conifer. Those plants, we call them naked seed plants because they don't have much of a good protective structure for the seed itself. After they fall out of the cone, they're pretty unprotected. But notice that most of these are trees, so they have a lot of commercial importance in the gymnosperms. Most of the time as gardeners, we're dealing with a group called angiosperms. Gymnosperms are naked seed. Angiosperms are protected seeds. And we love them because they make flowers. The angiosperms are the flowering plants. If it's got a flower that you can recognize, it's in this group called angiosperms. We divide angiosperms into two groups. I know I'm in groups, but now we're into something you need to know, these two words here. Monocots and dicots. They are different in their anatomy, and they are different in their physiology. They look different, they perform differently. Monocot. Mono means one. Cot is short for cotyledon. A cotyledon is a part of the plant that stores food for the next generation. A monocot has one of them. In the seed, there's only one of these little food storing structures, so it's a monocot. Now, we don't go around tearing up seeds very often, so what else could we use to recognize this group? Well, conveniently, the parts of the flower come in threes. So, 3 petals or 6 petals, a multiple of 3 is the easiest way to know a monocot if it's blooming, okay? If you look at the leaves of a monocot, the veins in the leaves run parallel from the bottom of the leaf all the way out to near the tip. And so the leaves are usually flat with all of these little parallel lines. The stems, we will get to what cambium is in the next lesson, but just know they don't have any of it, and it's important. What goes in the monocot group? Grasses, sedges, lilies, and iris are examples in this group. So we have a lot of economic importance and some decorative horticultural importance to this group. The other group is called dicots. Now, the seed, we'll start there again. In dicots, the seed has two of these little storage structures, and di means two. So, dicots, two seed storage structures. Again, very conveniently, the flower parts, if we can count things like petals, we're going to find that the flower parts are not in threes. They might be in twos or fours or fives, or there might be so many of them that we don't even want to count them. But they're not in threes. So if we can count three, we can tell a monocot from a dicot if it's blue. The leaves have a branching network of veins. We're going to look at that in detail in a little bit. So instead of the veins of the leaf starting all at the bottom and running parallel out to the end, there's usually one big one in the middle and a bunch coming off of it. So if it's not blooming, but we can look at the leaves, we can usually tell monocots from dicots. The stems have cambium, whatever that is, and here we find the majority of trees, shrubs, and flowers. Pretty much all the trees that are not gymnosperms are dicots. There's really only one monocot tree, and that's a palm tree. Here are two words to associate with dicots. As botanists, I call them dicots. But when I go to the chemical department to buy some herbicide to kill some weeds, I'm not going to see the word dicot. I will, however, see broadleaf or maybe forb. Broadleaf weed killer. That might say it on the label. What does it kill? Dicots. What does it not kill? Monocots. Or we might see a herbicide that says, all-purpose weed killer. What is it going to kill? Dicots and monocots. Okay? They operate differently. They don't just look different. Okay, levels of classification again. And this is why, as gardeners, we pay most of our attention down here toward the bottom. When we get down to family, there are some useful general characteristics to the family. I could go anywhere on this entire globe and have a decent chance of seeing a plant I've never seen before. If it's flowering, there's a decent chance I can tell you what family it belongs to. Because there are useful general characteristics to a family. Families are broken down into groups called genus groups. Everything in a genus is very similar. Genus is broken down into very particular kinds called species. And as botanists and as horticulturalists, we often break a species down into varieties. We talk a lot about varieties. You grow roses, I grow roses. Oh, what kind of roses do you grow? You're going to tell me the name of a variety that you love. And my favorite might be a different one. They're both roses, but they're different varieties. Now, we use these categories here as we learn, as we plant our gardens. We find out that a lot of the things that we grow in our gardens come from a rather short list of families. Whether we're interested in vegetables or flowers, the list is not super long for our favorites. Let's start with vegetables and look at that list. Cucurbitacea, Solanacea, Fabaceae, Malvaceae, Brassicacea, Poaceae, Liliaceae. What do you see, what do you hear as the common denominator here? ACEAE as the end of the word. That is the tag that tells you that a word is the name of a family. The beginning of the word tells you which family. Come on in.
I'm just visiting for a minute.
Come stay a while. All right. Can you tell me what might be in the Cucurbitacea family?
Cucumbers.
Cucumbers. Okay, now what else? What do you think is cucumbers' closest relatives? So similar that they be in the same family.
Zucchini.
All your squashes and all your gourds. That loofah is in the same family with the cucumber. Okay? Solanacea. Name doesn't give it away very well, but that's your tomato and your pepper and one other. Potatoes. Right. Their flowers look very similar. Fabaceae. That's a name change from long ago. That family used to be called Leguminosae.
Okay, so it's beans.
That's beans. That's beans. Malvaceae. There's only one in that group in your vegetable garden. It's a native of Africa.
Okra.
Okra.
You did good, girl.
Okra. All the other Malvaceae that we grow, we put in our flower garden. Brassicacea, the brassicas, the broccoli and collards, those are your cold crops. Poaceae, all right, that's another name change. Used to be called gramineae.
So your
That's
grains.
grains. So in your vegetable garden, what do we grow from the grass family in our vegetable garden?
Corn.
Corn.
Yeah.
Corn.
Onions.
Liliaceae.
Onions.
The lilies in your vegetable garden, that's your onions. And your garlic. So we've now covered most of the things you grow in your garden, right? All right. There's a few other things and a few other families, but that's basically, as vegetable gardeners, that's what we do right there. Flower gardeners have a wider variety, but they still have a short list of things they like the best. Asteraceae. Okay, another name change over the years. We used to call them composites.
Almost like a lemon.
That's your chrysanthemums and asters. Yeah.
And every little bitty wildflower you find out
And
there.
every DYC out there.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, DYC is very similar to LBB. LBB is little brown birds. Okay? Can't tell what they are. DYCs are damn yellow composites. And unless you got them in your hand and you look on the back side, you'll never figure them out because there's hundreds of them. So DYCs, okay? I didn't make that up, okay? I didn't make that up. Rosaceae, the roses, okay? Lamiaceae, okay. Another name change, this is the mint family. And there are a lot of members of the mint family in our flower gardens. Salvia, as an example. All of the different kinds
They
of
said
salvia.
rosemary they were saying at the herb thing, they said rosemary was part of it. I was like, what? It's part of
Yes, yes, that's what she said, that botanically they've done some DNA research, and they have moved rosemary It is a mint.
Lamiaceae now. Convolvulaceae. I should have put that one over here too. The flowers do this.
Morning glory.
Morning glories. What morning glory do we eat? They're passing them out in the parking lot.
I have no idea.
Sweet potatoes.
Oh, wow, okay.
The flower is actually rather pretty. It's not very big. Okay? Polymonaceae are the pinks. And the pink that we grow mostly, we grow phlox and dianthus. Iridacea again, all of the different fancy beautiful iris. And Liliaceae, the lilies. Now, that's most of your flowers. Okay? Now, the way common names and what we call scientific names work is this. Here's a picture of something I grew a couple of years ago. Common name, summer squash or yellow squash. Here's its scientific name, Cucurbita pepo, variety creamy improved. Okay, the family, you told me, was Cucurbitaceae. The genus is Cucurbita. The species is pepo. A scientific name is made up of the genus word and the species word. Cucurbita pepo, genus and species. And then if there is a variety, you can add that. Now, does that sound like English? No, no, not English, not English. Most scientific names come from either Latin or Greek, okay? And how are you going to know that something is a scientific name if you're just reading about something? We always set scientific names in italics. That's your clue that, oh, here's the scientific name. It's going to be in italics. And if you're doing a handwritten thing, you underline it. Also notice, when it's correctly done, the genus is capitalized and the species is not capitalized. Now that's helpful when you are looking at a seed catalog or something and you wonder what you're looking at. Now, I will tell you that when I was in college studying this stuff, they promised me, go ahead and spend the time to learn the scientific names because they never change. That was before they discovered DNA. Once they discovered DNA and they started looking at the actual genetic relationships between different plants and different animals, they discovered, as y'all were referring to, that sometimes we had things classified wrong. And so they were more kin to these than they were to those, so we need to move them from where they are. Well, now they have to have a new name. So, doggone, every time I have to look up what something is and give it its scientific name, I cannot just remember it. I have to look it up. Way too time consuming. But if you're going to be scientific accurate, unless you just learned it yesterday, you better look it back up. Because there are people out there who make a living figuring out these relationships, looking at the DNA and making decisions about what something really is and what it's really kin to. And the rest of us just try to, we just try to keep up, and it's hard. So that's how scientific names work, and why they're good, but why they're not quite as immutable as they promised me they would be. Because when I was in college and taking local flora. It was like, here's something new, here's the common name, here's the scientific name. You memorize them at the same time and in your head. Every time you see it, you see both of those names in your head. It just pops up out of your little filing cabinet. But now it's trashed. Let's look at this. Here we've got 3 different kinds of salvia. This one's tall. This one's not nearly as tall, and that one's not nearly as tall, and this one's blue, and that one's blue, and that one's red. Okay. How closely related are they? That tall one is Salvia farinaceae, variety Victoria. This one down here is Salvia farinaceae, variety Evolution. And this one, the red one, is Salvia coccinea. Okay. How closely related are they? How closely related? Okay? Which 2 of them are the most closely related? Why? Why is she right? They both are in the same genus and species, right? Okay? But they're different varieties. Both of those are cultivated varieties taken from wild plants. If you go out to the hill country, you will find Salvia farinaceae, not any kind of variety at all, just the kind that good Lord sent us. But both of those, you can get plants. How closely related are they? Extremely. Okay. Would they be able to breed together? They're different varieties,
Sure.
but they're same species.
Yeah, they definitely breed together when
Of course
you get
they
a
will.
weird variety.
Yeah, whatever you're going to get, it's going to resemble the 2 of them, and they're going to have no problem making fertile seeds together. Yes, they will. They'll do just fine. But now, what about that other one? Salvia coccinea.
No, because genus can't do with another. It's like wolves and dogs, right?
Yeah, yeah. They're in the same genus. So they're very, very similar, but not similar enough to breed together. So if I don't do anything but just let the seeds get made and fall, next year, am I going to have anything in that garden that is half coccinea and half farinaceae?
No.
No, I'm not. No, they're not that close relatives. Okay? So, that's how that works. So, we've talked about Carolus Linnaeus been classifying things. We have been classifying things since 1730. Okay? Long time. But modern DNA research and reevaluation of physical characteristics often leads to moving things around. Okay. Why bother with any of this stuff? To be sure what you're getting. Get what you meant to get. Take advantage of new developments when somebody actually finds a new mutation, develops a new variety that's better than the old one, and you hear about it, you'll know what you're looking for when you go over there to Bobo's, right? Okay, become an informed consumer of the gardening trade. Do we spend money on our gardens? Whoo, yes. We deserve to get what we meant to get. Okay, here's something that's come up just recently. Looking at those plants, they're all very similar, right? One of them's a tall type. The other 2 are short. One of them is a much richer color than the other. And all of them are very popular with butterflies. But one of them is more popular than the rest. This one right here, that is the one you want. If you're planting a butterfly garden, that is the one you want. Provided you don't want it to get this big, because it won't, okay? That is called Greg's Mist Flower. And if you went to the nursery, you should be able to identify that what you are buying is Greg's Mist Flower. It is the best for butterflies. Now this one over here is also good, and its trade name of it is going to be Blue Mist Flower. A gardener is likely to be attracted to it because it has a richer color to it. And if both plants were blooming at the same time, your hand would go toward that darker blue one, I'm sure it would. Rich blue is a very precious color in our gardens. Hard to get a real beautiful rich blue color. So we would likely pick this one up. The butterflies don't like it as well, and it doesn't bloom for as long. Greg's Mist Flower starts earlier and stays later. Now this one is coming into the trade, and it's good, and it has the advantage of being a tall plant. So if you want it in the back of your garden instead of down in the front, then they're calling it a mist flower. It's just bigger, but that's the kind of thing that happens. Every so often, a new plant will become popular, and you have to kind of know what you're getting into.
What was the second one called? I said, what was the second one called?
The Blue Mist Flower, and you're probably going to see that one just called Mist Flower Shrub Mist Flower, Tall Mist Flower. And it would still probably be a good value in a butterfly garden if it's going to be, in the back where other shorter things can be in front of it. But
Is it a form of like lantana?
no, it's not like a lantana.
The leaves look kind
No.
of on that
No.
one.
Do they know why? Just because it's more open? Would that be why the butterflies like it? Or why do butterflies like it? Do they know?
You can't always explain.
Okay, that's fine.
It's usually a combination of odor and sight. So we're very good at figuring out what butterflies like. Not so good figuring out why.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So would they call it, what, a butterfly bush again?
Well, be careful of that, because there is a plant that goes by the common name butterfly bush, which is entirely different. That's Buddleia, and it's a butterfly magnet. It deserves the name, but it's not this one here.
Who's your background? How did you get interested in this? Is your background in science?
My mother was a biology major, so I grew up with it. From the time I was little, I was not allowed to be squeamish about picking up anything. My grandmother was a gardener. She put me to work as soon as I was big enough for holding the shovel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I majored in biology when I went to college.
It shows in your presentation, my that's very good.
It's easy.
All of y'all are teachers anyway.
Yeah,
Aren't you a teacher? You a teacher?
I'm not very good.
But you're very good. It's remind me of a teacher. It's just all.
It's easy when you're teaching about what you love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the difference, Okay, lesson 2, the anatomy of plants. It amuses me to hear people say you need to be a vegan. You need to quit eating these living creatures.
They're not like.
Excuse me, plants are living creatures. All right, the anatomy of plants. We start at a microscopic level, and someday, I tell you what I would love to do. for a small group, and I think we're about to have enough equipment to actually do this. I think it would have a great time to do a lesson using the microscope to actually see a lot of these things. In teaching biology, we did a lot of that, and when I was teaching, which was quite some time ago, this idea of being able to put a microscope on the screen, that equipment was new and it was super expensive, and we were just proud to have it. And now it's everywhere, and you can even get a microscope thing to go on your cell phone, you know. And so it's more accessible than it ever used to be. But I'd love to show you this stuff alive, like I used to show my students. We'll start with cells and tissues. A plant cell, now that diagram would represent maybe a leaf. Maybe we've cut up a leaf and we're looking at a cell in a leaf, and these are some of the things that we would see in that very typical leaf cell. We would see that in the center we don't see much of anything at all. It turns out that that's mostly water. We call it the central vacuole. It's got things dissolved in it, but it's primarily water. And there's so much of it that everything else in the cell is kind of pressed up against the side. And around the outside edges where we can see things with a regular microscope, one of the main things we see are these little green things. And these little green things, and there's probably a whole lot of them, are called chloroplasts. And we're going to meet them again because they are very vital to our functioning plant, and we got to take care of them and keep them healthy. We're going to see one nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of the cell, and there's only one of them. And we're going to find it also pushed up against the side. That is where the genetic material is going to be. And remember, plants are eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus in their cell, and we can see it. Plants also, remember, had a cell wall. So outside the actual living part of the cell is this barrier, and sometimes it's pretty thick. It's made out of a particular chemical, cellulose, that does not dissolve in water. Now think about that. Could you build a cell wall for a plant out of something that dissolved in water? Well, no, the plant would it would be a puddle. Okay, so this is a not water soluble chemical, and the thicker it is, the more rigid that cell becomes. We take cells from all over the body and we look for where are cells that are similar. Where are the cells that look the same and they're doing the same thing? If they are similar, then we say they make up a tissue. A tissue is a group of cells that are similar in appearance and function. The list of tissues in a plant's body is quite different from a list of cells in your body. Your tissues might include muscle tissue, nervous tissue. There's two things you won't find in plants. They have covering tissues. You have covering tissues. So do they. I'm going to call it epidermis. That's a familiar word. We call that outside of our skin by the same name. There are workhorse tissues such as parenchyma. The workhorse tissues are doing the work of plants, which is mostly involved with capturing light, turning it into food, photosynthesis, storing the products of that food, and so forth. So there are really busy kinds of tissue that do those things. Vascular tissue, remember whether you had vascular tissue or you didn't was a thing. So vascular tissue in your body, that was like arteries and veins. But in plants, the words are xylem and phloem. And we're going to learn those two words. Xylem up, phloem down. Xylem up, phloem down. And very important, dividing tissues. Places in the body where the cells are, one cell is dividing into two very rapidly, very frequently. Those dividing tissues are called meristems. A meristem under the microscope, you can see the cells are real small because they're new. They're rapidly dividing. Get your tissues together and you form organs. Cell, tissue, organ. Tissues are often continuous between organs. Let's think about that xylem and phloem tissue. It starts all the way down here in the roots, continuous in the stem, continuous out into the leaves, so that materials that are made one place can get to the other place. So a lot of continuous tissues. Plants grow differently from animals. A typical animal reaches a certain size and then it's done. All it does for the rest of its life is kind of repair damage. Plants grow constantly. Faster or slower, but almost constantly. Some growth results when cells divide to make more cells. If we've got one cell and it divides, now we've got two cells, and then those cells are going to get a little bigger, so the plant is going to grow overall. Primary growth comes from meristem tissue, that rapidly dividing tissue that's found in buds and tips of stems and tips of roots. So primary growth makes the plant get longer, taller on top, deeper down below. That's primary growth, the first kind. Secondary growth, the dividing cells are in the stem and they're oriented so that the division causes the stem to get wider. So primary growth is growth in length. Secondary growth is growth in width. Some plant growth results from existing cells becoming larger. Once you've made a little bitty cell, and that cell gets bigger than the whole plant can do. When examining organs, consider their growth history. How did they get to be there? Okay? We divide a plant into 6 basic organs: roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, seeds. The vegetative parts don't have anything to do with reproduction. They're just the body of the plant doing its own thing, being a functioning creature. The roots, the stems, the leaves. Then the reproductive parts, the flower, the fruit, the seed. Please don't confuse the word vegetative with vegetable. 2 different things. Okay. Start with roots. I gave you an onion. Yeah? Look at your onion. See those little roots? The longer you leave it in the plastic bag in the refrigerator, the more those little roots are going to grow. Okay? Alright? The root functions to absorb water. They are built to do that. We're going to look at a microscope slide and we're going to see how it is that they are so good at absorbing materials, absorbing water and things that are dissolved in the water, the nutrients. To support the upper part of the plant, you're going to see a picture of one day that didn't work. To store food for later use. In general, on the average, if you pull up a monocot plant, you're going to see a mass of roots, and no one of them looks way bigger than any of the others. Call that a fibrous root system. If you look at your onion, there's a whole bunch of little roots all about the same. That's a fibrous root system. But if you pull up a dicot plant, very often when you pull up a dicot plant, you will see that there is one root that is bigger, longer, stronger than all the rest, and the others seem to be branching off of it. We call that one big root a tap root, and that's a taproot system. Now, if the plant is very old, it may be less apparent that there was a taproot in the beginning, because some of these branches off to the side may have gotten so big over the years that they're all about, equal. But that's often true on a young plant, like you're out there pulling weeds, and you're jerking up weeds. You can probably tell by the roots whether you're jerking up monocots or dicots. Okay, that's what my back pasture, getting to my back pasture looks like this now. We had a windstorm. I've probably got 30 trees laying on the ground like that. Now, that's a water oak. This is a riparian area, which means that it floods. Okay, it's great for water oaks. That tree was probably 70 feet tall. When it fell over, how deep a hole did it leave? Maybe 2 feet.
It's wide.
It's wide, but it's not deep. That tree did not have a deep supporting root system that it needed on that day. Somewhere back a long time ago, somebody planted an idea in a lot of minds that the root system is a mirror image of what you see in the air. That, you got a tree that's this big, you must have a root system that's, like a mirror image. No! It's not like that at all. It's not like that. Most of the root system of a tree is in the top 1 or 2 feet. When you had your lesson on trees, did y'all talk about that? That the roots spread out, but they don't necessarily go super deep. Okay? Can you relate that to the root system maybe of your lawn? You want your lawn's roots to be deep, right? What if you only water your lawn so that the top inch gets water, but it never goes? You never give it enough water to go real deep. Where are those plants' roots going to be?
On top.
On the top. And then what's going to happen? You're going to mow. It's going to get hot. Those roots are going to die. They don't have any deep ones. You lost your lawn because you didn't water deep and you mowed it too short. You see a lot of people do that.
And those yo ponds, Their roots go deep, don't they?
Their roots go everywhere.
That's right, full of mud in this lot.
Yaupon is a challenge because of the way it grows as a multi-stemmed shrub with a network of roots that extends way farther than you think. Those are shallow roots in most cases, and if you cut the top, they just sprout up. I've got some areas that I've had the mulcher do the work, and then, you know, the guy says, you better keep it mowed, And in the places where I've done that, you know, you look out there and it looks like, you know, it's nice and green, and then you realize that what you're seeing is yaupon sprouts this tall. And yeah, I keep them mowed. And someday I'm going to win. But it would be my advice if you're trying to get rid of yaupon, because the roots are so big and it's so hard to get them all, that the cut stump method, where you cut and immediately you put your herbicide on that wound, that's the best way of doing it. Because then those roots actually die.
Have you ever tried goats?
I have donkeys. I don't need goats.
Because we had yaupon, about 5 acres, and the goats came through, when they eat it, it wouldn't come back. But that's just, maybe they just overgrazed. Maybe they just overgrazed, but they
You can't hardly overgraze them.
they just ate it.
Well, you gotta, if you leave them in there. You know, yaupon is our only native source of caffeine.
Really?
Yeah. Every time I watch my cows and my donkeys eating that yaupon, it's like, yeah, you're having a good morning, aren't you?
Good morning, Jen.
Yeah. Okay, so we can through our cultural practices, we can do some good toward making a plant have a root system that is resilient for things like drought. But we also have to recognize that genetically that root system wants to do, you know, it wants to do a certain thing. And there's nothing I can do to make a forest full of trees have a different shaped root than what nature intended. So if you need firewood, chainsaw, come on, free, load it yourself.
Hey, I don't know if you're interested, but on my way back from wherever I was the other day, I saw a big billboard, and it said, if you want to get rid of lumber, trees, whatever, call. And it's something to do with A&M, and they're collecting wood for their bonfire. And they said, we'll come do it. It was like a billboard right outside of Hearn, and it said, we'll come get your lumber, you know. So I don't know if you're interested, but there you go.
They can have all they'll come get. It's the problem is the rickety little bridge between where this is and where it needs to be. So you can take it out one log at a time.
Well, if they want it bad enough, you know.
If they want it bad enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
If I go back that way, I'll get that number.
You get that number. Okay, here's a photograph and a diagram of an onion root. If you took one of those little white live onion roots and put it under the microscope and stained it correctly, this is what you'd see. You would see columns of cells. Down at the near tip down here, something different is going on. And every so often, there's a little extension out the side. The diagram makes it a little easier to see what's going on. That root is growing at a really rapid rate, probably 1/8 of an inch a day or so. So a lot of cell division is going on in that root. And that little root, all that cell division is going on down here near the tip end. The cells in that area are really tiny, and about every 6 to 12 hours they divide. So, rapid growth. That thing is called an apical meristem. apical for apex, the tip end. In a root that's growing in soil, some of the cells that are being made get pushed forward. And that means that they're coming in contact with the abrasive soil, the sand. They die. And every now and then they get scraped off. But because of this root cap, this real delicate area right behind it is safe. So the root cap is pretty important for the root's survival. Going up the root is like going back in time. 6 hours ago, that tip end was probably right up here. And 12 hours ago, that tip end was right up here. And a few days ago, it was way up there. But now look at what's happened on that root since then. On the outside cells, some of the outside cells have grown little protuberances, little extensions. And we call those things root hairs. And under perfect circumstances, you can see them without a microscope. They're just like a little white poof about, an inch or so back from the growing tip. The tissue there is so thin that there's no problem at all of materials going in through that cell wall. And because of that root hair having so much more surface area, you can see the root is really designed for the uptake of nutrients. Now, they're delicate, so they don't last. After soaking up water and nutrients for a few days, they've received enough damage from the sand and everything that they die, but that's okay because they've been replaced by ones coming later. Every day you're wearing some out and getting some new ones. Now, have you ever had the experience buying a plant that you're going to plant into your garden and you take it out of the pot and you put it in the soil and you do everything, but for about the first day or 2 or 3 it's wilted and then it starts to perk back up? Why do you suppose that is?
The root hairs are gone and then they grow back, right?
Right. In the mechanical damage that you did while you were planting that seedling, you messed up a lot of root hairs. So they don't have the ability to uptake as fast as they need. But if they've got enough resources to survive for 2 or 3 days, they'll be okay because they'll grow back. What can you do to make their life easier?
Cut the plant back so it doesn't have as much to support.
Okay, number 1, be sure that it's not a situation where you need to prune the top a little bit. Because that helps a lot of plants, especially trees, young trees and shrubs. You are often encouraged to prune them down some. The other thing you can do is simply don't let them get dry. Keep them wet for 2 or 3 days. We have something that we're in the habit of when we're out there doing our master gardening kind of stuff, like when we're planting plants over at the Veterans Memorial or out anywhere that we're doing. We'll take our 6-pack of whatever our little things are, and we'll have us a bucket that's full of water. And we say we baptize those plants. We push that whole 6-pack in until it doesn't bubble anymore. And that means that soil in that little cup is completely wet, and then we plant them in a wet hole. And then we, if you're at home, it's easier to do, but keep them wet for 3 or 4 days. Because we know that no matter how gentle we try to be, we're going to break a lot of root hairs when we do a transplant. So we're doing the best we can to help that plant. 2 or 3 days might be all the help it needs to take off, build its own new root hairs, and go on from there. Oh, one other thing. We're knowing more and more about this and respecting it more. There are a lot of plants that instead of relying entirely on root hairs, they have an association with a network of fungus that's in the ground. That fungus is called a mycorrhiza, and it's a mutual relationship between the plant and the fungus. And the fungus is substituting for roots. And there are some plants that rely on that so much that if the right kind of fungus is not in the soil, they just don't grow well. One of our most beloved wildflowers, the Indian paintbrush, is like that. It requires a mycorrhiza association. So if you plant it somewhere and it just doesn't do any good, it could be because the wrong kind of fungus. You know, it's that their kind is not in that soil. And there are some products that you can start to get, the products on the market now, where you can actually inoculate soil with mycorrhiza fungus. And some plants, some places you can even get potting soil that's got mycorrhiza built into it, and that's a good thing. So, all right.
I love the smell of onions.
I almost rather smell them than eat them. Yeah. Okay, stems. Stem functions. Transport liquids up and down. And can you tell me what's the tissue that goes up? What's the tissue that goes down?
Phloem up, xylem down?
No,
Xylem
no,
up,
no.
phloem down?
Xylem up,
Oh, phloem down.
Phloem down.
Phloem down, okay.
xylem up, phloem down. Support the other organs, and they occasionally do a few other things. Now, there's a picture of a coleus, okay? If we took our coleus and sliced open that very, very tippy top end and put that under the microscope, this is what we'd see. We'd see the stem, and right at that very tippy top, and right here at the base of each leaf, we would see that the cells are much smaller than they are out here. The areas that we're seeing with the tiny little cells are meristems. That's where the cell division, that's where the growth is taking place. Apical meristem, apex is the top of a triangle, so apical meristem at the very tip end of a stem, and additional lateral meristems are the buds at the base of each leaf that will be sideways growth later on. So that's what we would see under the microscope. When you were doing your propagation and you're making your cuttings, tell me what kind of plants they brought to make cuttings with. What did you?
Begonias,
Rose.
coleus,
Roses?
no, we did do roses, didn't we? No, we did that. Yeah, she brought. I got the rose, Belinda's dream.
Oh, what a nice one. Lavender or rosemary?
Rosemary.
Rosemary? Okay. All right. When you are working with a stem, okay, when you're working with a stem, can you flip the light? Ouch. It's got thorns. Just ran around my yard this morning, grabbing some things. All right. this is probably the best one to show you. A stem has places where leaves come out. Okay? And then there are places in between where stems come out. The place where a stem comes out is called a node. So that's a node. This is a node. Node, 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 node. Internode, 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 internode. So a stem is a series of nodes and internodes. When you are making cuttings, you might have been taught that the stuff you stick under the ground, you need to have a node buried, okay? Because with some plants, they have to have that in order to form any new roots. But when you were cutting, you were probably encouraged to cut an internode. And you were probably encouraged to have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 nodes above ground, right? So when you're doing propagating is one of the times when recognizing a node from an internode is pretty important. Notice on this plant, each node has 2 leaves coming out. Okay? Some plants will have 1 leaf coming out. Some will have more than 2. Let's see what we can see with this one. All right. Do you know what that is? Anybody know what that is?
Crepe myrtle. I have no idea.
That's elderberry.
Elderberry.
Mm-hmm. That's elderberry. This,
I don't have any.
let's see if anybody in here says it's marijuana. Ooh. No, it's not
No,
marijuana.
it's
it's like
Texas hibiscus.
It's Vitex.
Is that Vitex?
This is
Let's
Vitex.
see. Let me see
This is
closer.
Vitex. Oh, I'll pass them around. But it's got node, internode, node, internode, all up and down. And then it's got different shaped leaves. I really brought these mostly to look at the difference in what the leaves are going to be like. But notice that on this plant here, and I'm picking it up carefully because it's got a lot of thorns on it. The nodes are real short. So the leaves look like they're coming from real close together. All right? Okay, this is prickly ash. Okay. Do you know that sometimes you'll have a plant that's described as a dwarf? You know, you go to the nursery and you dwarf this, dwarf that. Genetically, the length of that node, that's not just a property of the nutrition of the plant. It's a property of the genetics of it. And what would a plant look like if you could genetically select for ones with short internodes? What would happen to a plant that was going to be 6 feet tall, but all the internodes were shortened?
It would be dwarf.
It would only be this tall, but it would still have just as many leaves. Very often, plants in the horticultural trade that are dwarfed are also very, very thick and full and bushy, and those are probably desirable characteristics. So if we can make a plant that is dwarfed by having short internodes, that could be a very desirable variety. Okay. Types of stems. Some stems, if they're old enough, have added enough layers of some of the different tissues that they become pretty rigid. Woody stem is what we call them. Some plants can produce a woody stem in this year, in 1 year's growth, the plant is already woody. Some plants, it takes a long time for them to get that rigid. But a woody stem, in contrast, a herbaceous stem is always soft. No matter how old it is, it's always soft. So, looking at that peach branch there, that's a woody stem. The grass is herbaceous. A young stem shows a very distinct organization of epidermis cells, other cells, a ring of vascular cells near the center. But as plants get older, and I'm thinking here of plants that live for many years, the growth area of the plant, remember there is a tissue called cambium that makes it get thicker. Outside of the cambium layer is phloem, and inside of the cambium layer is xylem. And let's say that's the cambium layer, like right there. Okay? The phloem is very near the surface. The xylem is accumulating to the center, and let's say that's a young tree trunk. What do we see here, here, here? It's all xylem. And look at that pattern. What do you see?
Small.
Look around. Look at the lumber that you can see in this. See those?
You're talking about rings?
Those are growth rings. This would be this year's growth, last year, the year before that. Can you tell how old a tree is by looking at the rings when you cut through it? Oh yeah. You can even tell whether it was a good year or a bad year. And if you can look at an entire slice through a whole tree, you can see that maybe it was growing better on one side than it was on the other side. Maybe it had a sunny side and a shady side. So that's where your tree rings are coming in. That's xylem. They're a result of the fact that the tree is always growing, but it grows faster or slower through the year. So the cells are bigger or smaller. And we see that as a pattern. Where would we find trees growing that don't have rings?
A rainforest or something like that?
A tropical place that doesn't have a distinct summer and winter. So they're growing at a pretty much steady space year-round, would give you a lumber that is very smooth and doesn't have these stripes that we associate with like oak. Okay? Now to leaves. You've got a pile of leaves, right? Okay, functions of leaves. Photosynthesis, which is where the plant is making food, often modified for other uses, and a limited lifespan. What do we call plants that go through their entire life cycle in a single year? From seed to flower to dead, those are annuals, okay? What do we call plants that live a long time, many years?
Perennials.
Perennials. Is there anything in between?
Biennials?
Biennial. A biennial, the seed sprouts 1 year, some vegetative growth, overwinters, and then blooms and dies the following year. Biennial. Most of our wildflowers are biennials because the seeds sprout in the late fall, overwinter, about that tall, and then shoot up and bloom in the spring, and we notice them. But most of those wildflowers started sprouting in the fall, and that's why you're encouraged to plant your wildflower seeds in the fall, not in the spring, because they're actually biennials. Now, whether a plant is an annual or a biennial or a perennial, leaves don't live forever. Most perennial plants, the leaf will live for 2 years. That's typical. And that is why with some evergreen trees, like a magnolia, there'll be a time of the year when you see a whole lot of yellow leaves on them. And you think, oh dear, something wrong.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong.
My oak trees lose a lot of leaves.
Well, an oak is going to lose all of its leaves every year. But a magnolia is an evergreen, so it seems like it's always green, but it's not always the same leaves. It will shed, not this year's leaves, but it will shed last year's leaves, kind of all in a bunch, at the same time that it's putting on a new set. So it will always have green leaves, but any individual leaf lives for 2 years. And there's nothing wrong with how it does that. Pine trees the same way. They'll shed a lot of needles all at one time, but they're also growing a new set every year. Okay. Patterns of veins often distinguishes monocots from dicots. You've got onion, and you've got 2 different kinds of dead leaves. And by the way, those dead leaves, did that injure the plant when they fell off?
No.
In the fall, deciduous plants, the ones that lose all their leaves at once, typically form a layer at the bottom of a leaf that cuts off circulation. And that's why the leaf dies and it falls off. So there's no damage to the stem when that leaf finally comes off. All right, I want you to look at your onion first of all. Go ahead and pull off the outermost leaf. Go ahead and, well, maybe not if it's all dead and yucky. The outermost healthy looking leaf. Yeah, like that. Do like that. All right. Now look at that leaf and figure out, can you see veins in it? And if you can, describe how they're running. Maybe you can see it best in that one, in that piece.
This one.
Can you see the veins kind of all going? Yeah. All right. What is that a characteristic of? What group? Monocots. Monocots. Okay. Now look at your 2 dead leaves. You can almost see it better from the back side of the leaf than you can from the front. Do you see different sizes of veins?
Yeah.
On the red oak, you very definitely see one vein that goes all the way from the base straight out to the tip, and then a whole lot of side branches coming off. What about the sweet gum leaf? Tell me about the sweet gum leaf.
They're lateral, spread out,
They're spread out,
dicot.
but there's like one vein going toward each point, right? They all kind of come from the same base, and then they spread out. Okay. The 2 tree leaves there, those are called net veined. Net vein, because the veins are forming a network. They're not all going parallel. But the ones on the oak are called pinnate arrangement. Pinna is feather. So one central stem and a whole lot of branches coming out the side is pinnate net. And the sweet gum is called palmate net. Because just think of your fingers coming out of your palm. And it kind of is like that. So net palmate, net pinnate, both of those are dicot. But the parallel is a monocot. The expanded portion of the leaf is the blade. Okay. Nice collard greens I had a few years ago. The blade, if it is all in one piece, then we say that's a simple leaf. The dead leaves there. Each leaf that you're looking at, that's a leaf. That's the whole leaf. That's all there was of it. That's a simple leaf. But sometimes the blade of the leaf is divided into little parts. Like this one is. All right? That's all one leaf. Right there. That's one leaf. How do I know that that's one leaf? Well, what is right there at the base of that leaf on the stem? There's a bud. At the base of a leaf, there is always a bud. That bud, like that one, that bud has already grown out to be a side branch. But there's always a bud at the base of a leaf. And everything past that bud is one leaf. I don't care how many little parts there are of it. We call them leaflets. Okay? Leaflets. This one is a compound leaf also. All right. Pull off one. These are compound leaves. All right? And all of those are leaflets. And how do I know? Because when I looked at the stem, there was a bud at the base of each one. Now, the ones that are arranged like that are called pinnate compound. What did pinna mean? Just told you. What is pinna? It's feather. All right? Let that remind you of a feather. But these all come from one spot. Palmate. Palmate compound. Pinnate compound. And if they were all just one piece, they'd be simple. In designing a landscape, if what you are looking for is variety of texture, this is one of the ways you can get more variety into your plantings, is to have some of those plants be simple and others be compound leaves of different shapes. There is a name for every shape you can imagine. Botanists love words, can you tell? There are probably 20 words for the shape of the tip of a leaf, another 20 for the shape of the base, another 20 for the margin, and probably 20 more for the surface and how fuzzy it is or how slick it is. And yes, when you take a botany class, you get a little vocabulary book as one of your things that you get to buy from the bookstore. Anybody recognize that plant right now? That's about what it looks like right now. It's a biennial. and it's gonna be that big until spring. The leaves are about that long, and they're very fuzzy. That's mullein. In the spring, it will shoot up 6 feet tall with a flower. But right now, it's like that, okay?
Where'd you get it?
It's native.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It is a medicinal plant,
Mhm.
and if you're lost in the woods and you need some toilet paper, it'd be all right, unless you happen to be allergic. Most people are not. It's nice and soft. Okay. Mullein is a great native addition to a butterfly garden or a medicinal garden, anything like specialty, because it is unique and interesting, not for the flowers, which are nice, but the rest of the year, it's got interesting leaves. And we know there are a lot of trees that are chosen because of the fall color. Because we have some trees that are not very good at that, and others that are real good at having fall color. Unfortunately, there was one tree with wonderful fall color that became extremely popular until we realized its invasive nature. And that's why now you should not be able to go to a nursery and buy a Chinese tallow tree. They are highly invasive. But they are pretty in the fall. They are. And that's why they got popular in the first place. Okay. There's a bud at the base of the leaf. Attachment to the nodes is called by a variable stalk called a petiole. And the arrangement may be opposite, alternate, or whorled. How many leaves are at each node? Okay, flowers. Functions of flowers contain the sexual organs, enhance reproductive success. How could the flower enhance reproductive success? What would be a way to do that?
By scent, by color, by...
And because of the way you look and the way you smell and the way you taste, what happens?
all the bugs come say.
Yeah, all your pollinators could be attracted. Gardeners place great emphasis on flowering behavior when selecting plants. Yes, we do. Botanists place great emphasis on flowers when classifying plants. There are a lot of plants that you just can't be sure what they are unless you can see them bloom. I belong to several Facebook groups. One of them that is very good is Texas Flora, and another one that I really like is Texas Plants and Invertebrates. And you would be amazed at how often people submit bad pictures of plants that are not blooming and then want an exact identification. That's really hard. A lot of plants look alike if you can't see the flowers. And then on top of that, people take bad pictures. Or they take that bad picture and then they submit it to one of these rather newfangled machine learning, send the picture in and the machine tells you what the plant is. Talk about wrong answers. Don't even do that, okay? It'll tell you you've got a plant that only grows in Canada and it doesn't care, all right? Submit it to real life people, okay? All right, achieving success with flowers is the goal of many gardeners, okay? I love that picture. I'm real proud of that picture. I took almost all pictures on this, so that's a new one. It's one of my new favorites. Flower structures. Okay. A lot of what you see in a flower is sexual parts. Now, you have a flower, right? Okay, I'm pretty proud. That's a 4 o'clock, and I figured they'd all be shriveled up by now, and they're shriveling. But if you can go ahead and pull that flower, just pluck it out, and you're going to try to tear it apart into little piecey parts. As you tear it apart,
Something.
Killing your flowers.
oh, go ahead, tear it up, tear it up. Rip open the petals. See what you can find down inside.
My glasses.
Here, let me turn on some more lights.
Glasses in there, I hope.
This looks like a little apple.
No glasses there. No glasses there.
Ah, you have found an ovary.
So what that is?
Glasses there.
Yeah. Right? Do you find any little long thread-like
Mhm.
structures? Okay. Oh, look at what she's done. Look at, she's the winner.
Oh, are you the winner?
She's,
She said tear it up. I know how to do that.
okay. She got all her boy parts laid out and all her girl parts laid
I
out.
didn't know. I don't know what.
Okay.
I'm still trying to find glasses, which I didn't get very well. Okay.
All right. Some of those parts on that flower had to do with boy parts and girl parts, okay? Others were just for pretties, okay? The sexual parts of a flower, there are female parts and there are male parts. The female structure as a whole is called a pistil. And notice how that word is spelled, P-I-S-T-I-L. It's not the same as a gun. The pistil has an ovary, which is where the actual infant seeds are located. Then it has a stigma, which is a sticky thing, and they're connected with a little style, a little connection. The stamen is the boy part, and it's made up of a little box called an anther, and that's where the pollen is made. And that little box is usually on a stalk. So
So
you
all
have-
of that's right here?
yeah, all of that's right there. That's your ovary.
That thing right
That
there?
right there was your
I thought
ovary.
it came off a leaf somewhere.
No, that
Okay.
was your ovary.
Okay.
And then, do all of these look exactly the same, or is one of them a little different from the
That
others?
one's way different.
Okay, the one that's way different, that was the stigma and the style. And the ones that look the same, if they haven't shriveled up too bad, there's a little box and a little stalk. And those are the stamens. There's probably 5 of them. If you manage to get them
Those
all
are the
out.
stains?
I got 5.
Got 5?
Uh-huh.
I told you you were a wiener. Yes. Yeah.
Definitely good.
Okay.
I don't have a box, so I don't know where that one.
Yeah. This is not the ideal plant to tear up, but it was what was blooming in my yard today. So that's what you get.
Now is this before it turns into a flower?
You've got buds, and you may also have spots where you've got one where there's got the black, the seed is black and looks like a little hand grenade.
Mm-hmm.
You got a seed there from several days ago.
Smart lady. Look at you.
All right. Do you know what these are called?
You just told us 4 o'clock.
4 o'clocks.
That's
They
the
are.
only reason I know.
They are not a native. They have native relatives, but they are not native. But they are incredibly easy to grow. And they will get totally out of hand.
If we plant this, will it grow?
it's gotta be, now she's got the black seed, you plant that, it'll grow. They are perennial,
Okay.
they make a big old root, and they also make a bazillion seeds, and every one of them will grow. So if you want some, I hope you want a bunch of them, because you're probably gonna get a bunch of them.
Yes, I do.
Didn't we get some seeds there?
Yeah, right there in Walker County, you might have picked
Yeah.
up some seeds.
I love them because you don't have to do anything to them. I just, when they try to grow out in the lawn, I just mow them down and, and I've got about 5 different colors. They come in different colors. They even come stripes with stripes in them. I don't have any of those. You can buy the seeds for the striped kind.
Now, where are they native?
South America, I believe. Yeah. It's also called Marvel of Peru. Yeah. Mirabilis or Marvel of Peru or 4 o'clocks. And they are great if you like to enjoy your garden in the late afternoon or first thing in the morning or in the middle of the night, because that's when they're open. They are pollinated by moths, but they will also attract late afternoon hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love trumpet-shaped flowers. So if you're lazy, you'll love this plant. Okay, I love this plant. Okay, a flower rather, with both male and female parts is perfect. Okay, I don't care if it's ugly. Okay, it's perfect. If it's got male and female, it's perfect. These were perfect flowers. Okay. If the whole plant has both male and female parts, it's called monoecious. Mono means one. Ecium comes from the Greek word for house. One house, one plant. Male and female in one house. Some plants are monoecious, but the male parts are in one flower and the female parts are in a different flower. But they're all in the same plant. Sometimes you'll have a plant where all the flowers are nothing but male parts. And a separate plant will have flowers that are nothing but female. So the entire plant is a boy or a girl. And that's called dioecious, 2 houses. Give you an example of that. Sweet gum. Sweet gum is dioecious. You know those sweet gum balls that we hate to step on, hate to have to mow over? They only come from female trees. And if you look at your sweet gum trees, they've either got balls on them or they don't. You got female flowers, they're going to make seeds. So they're going to make those sweet gum balls that are full of seeds. But the male flowers, all they do is make pollen. And then they fall off and they're done. So if you got a sweet gum in your yard and it's a male, you get all the pretty color in the fall and all of that, and you don't get any sweet gum balls to have to.
Yeah, all girl trees, right?
I do.
Yeah, all girl trees, yeah. Yeah. Another example of that is all of the members of the hollies. And that includes yaupon. Yaupon is a holly. A yaupon tree or a yaupon bush either has red berries all over it or doesn't. If you look in the spring at those little bitty flowers, they've either got stamens or they've got an ovary. One or the other, not both. Because they are dioecious. If you wanted hollies, a hedge of hollies, or a specimen holly tree, which would you like to have? You want a boy or a girl?
A girl.
I want a girl. I want those red berries in the
One
wintertime.
of the pretty ones.
Yeah, they're the pretty ones. Well, what if nobody in the neighborhood has a boy?
You're in deep trouble.
You still don't get any red berries, do you? Somebody's got to have a boy in the reasonable neighborhood. And then you want the girls so that you have all that pretty colored Christmas stuff. Okay. Oh, another example of that. The squash. Squash is a monoecious plant, but the flowers are either male or female. The female squash flower has the little squash visible right behind the flower. You can see it, a little miniature squash. The male just has a long stalk behind the flower. When they start blooming, all the flowers are male. And then after a week or two, it'll start having female flowers. Why do you suppose that is? What is the advantage of making flowers that are male when there's no females available? Kind of a waste of effort. You're making pollen, but there's no females in the neighborhood because everybody's on the same schedule. What's the point?
The bees
Why?
pollinate.
The bees would rather come to a male flower than to a female flower. Why?
Are they bigger? Or there more of them? Or they're first out, so they're coming.
Plus the
They get the pollen.
trumpet.
Bees want pollen and nectar. So what are you doing with those first week or two? You're training the bees.
Oh.
You're training your local bees. Come here. There's good stuff here. And then later on, when the female flowers start to bloom, you've got the pollinators are already in the habit of coming into your garden. It wasn't a waste of time after all.
Can you use those male flowers to like cook with? Stuff them?
Yes,
Stuff?
you can.
You can.
Flat squash flowers are edible, male and female. They're all fry them up.
Stuff them in there, yeah.
Whatever you stuff them, whatever you want. You know, you put some batter. You put some batter on something and put it in some hot grease. We're going to eat it. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Amen.
It's Texas, you fry it.
If it's Texas, you fry it. Yeah. Yucca flowers the same way. I have never eaten any, but people say, yeah, fry up yucca flowers. Okay. Accessory parts. We've been talking about all the boy parts and the girl parts, but as gardeners, we're usually more interested in the accessory parts, the petals that make it beautiful. All the petals together make up the corolla, the crown of the flower. Behind the petals, you find the green sepals back behind. You left when you plucked out the pretty part of that flower, you left the sepals back behind. They're green. Think of a rose. Think of a rose bud, the green leaf-like pieces that protect it and wrap around it, and they fold back. That's the sepals. And then in some flowers, you can't tell the petals from the sepals. They're all the same. And the word for that, we hardly ever see it use it, is tepal. They have tepals. They don't have petals or sepals.
Is that poinsettia?
Oh no, a poinsettia is entirely different. The colorful part of a poinsettia is a leaf.
Okay.
Yeah, the flower is very small. The poinsettia flower is very small. But a tulip.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got 6, and they're all the same. Regular versus irregular. Well, that's just another way of saying is it the same all the way around, or is it different top to bottom, left to right, or all the petals the same? A regular flower is perfectly symmetrical all the way around. An irregular flower, think of an orchid as an irregular flower. You know, you've got one up, 2 on the side, a couple hanging down.
Yeah, okay.
You know, that's irregular. Fragrance, nectar, and ultraviolet markings that we cannot entirely appreciate. Yes, we can smell some flowers, and we usually like the smell, but there's a lot more going on with the fragrance than our nose is capable of appreciating. And flowers that give off nectar, well, we don't care, but the insects certainly do. And ultraviolet markings don't matter to us because we cannot see ultraviolet, but insects can. So a flower is designed for attracting that insect. Okay, here's your test question. Can you identify the parts in that daylily? All right. First of all, look at the accessory parts. How many of them are there? Can you count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Monocot or dicot? Monocot, because in a monocot the flower parts are in 3s or multiples of 3. Okay, so this is a monocot flower. Are those petals or sepals or tepals? All look the same? Tepals. Tepals, because they all look the same. Actually, 3 of them are petals and 3 of them are sepals, but they all look the same. So use that new word, tepal. All right, what's this going on in the middle? What's all of that?
Whatever she had, got.
Yeah. It's okay to look back.
The stamen and a pistil.
Stamens and a pistil. Very good. The stamens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, usually the same number as there were tepals. Sometimes more, sometimes a lot more. The same in this case. Now, look at this little box. What's the name of the little box? Look back if you don't remember. The little box on the stamen.
Stigma. Over.
Stamen.
Okay, the whole thing is a stamen.
Stigma?
No, you're in the wrong gender.
Oh, well.
Look at your boy parts. That's a little
Anther
box.
filament.
Anther. Okay, this is a filament. That's the anther. What is being manufactured in the anther?
Pollen.
Pollen. It's a little box of pollen. And in this case, it's mature pollen because you can actually see the graininess of it. That pollen is ready to be carried. Now this one piece that's different, that's the female part. You can't see the ovary way down inside. What's that little tip end right there? What's that? The little tip end of the female part.
That's the pistil.
The whole thing's the pistil.
Oh, okay.
Stigma.
Stigma.
There's
And it's
stigma, okay.
sticky.
Okay.
The sticky stigma. Now if you were an insect, look at what you would have to do. Move this pollen over here. Can you see that a bumblebee crawling around in there? There'd be a good chance of them picking up pollen and then brushing it off as they explored and crawled around.
And it's sticky, so it doesn't.
And it's sticky, so, and only 1 pollen grain is needed, well actually 2, to fertilize the seed. So you don't have to get a whole lot of pollen on there, just a few grains. It does have to be the right kind of pollen if that bumblebee has been visiting some other kind of flower and he's all covered with pollen from somewhere else and gets on here, the pollen that sticks won't do any good. It won't survive. It doesn't matter. It's got to be from the same kind of plant. Okay, so you can do this, but you need practice. Okay? That's all right. All right. Now let's talk about fruit for a bit. Definition. Fruit is a ripened ovary containing seeds. Okay? Do not confuse the word fruit when you're speaking as a botanist to the word fruit when you're speaking about food. Okay? A ripened ovary containing seeds is a fruit. Therefore, a tomato is a fruit, and a cucumber is a fruit. A whole lot of things that we eat are fruits if they are ripened ovaries and they contain seeds. Okay? They can be fleshy, like that tomato, or they could be dry, like a pecan. There are lots of types of fruit, and each one, of course, has a name. Drupe, as an example, has one hard seed. Can you think of an example of a drupe? A fleshy fruit with one hard seed. A plum.
Peach.
A peach. Right. Berries are fleshy fruits with several seeds. A grape. A tomato.
Cucumber.
Yeah. A pod is a dry fruit with several seeds enclosed. And that could be a bean. Yeah, it's fleshy if you eat it when it's not mature. But if you're growing green beans and you forget to pick, don't those pods get big and dry and leathery? Okay. Seeds. A seed is the embryo for the next generation. Plus, stored food to get it going, to keep it alive. And then the whole thing has a tough seed coat. When a seed is made, it's amazing how long it can survive. Years. It's not unusual at all for seeds to remain alive years later. Don't throw out seeds just because you bought them last year. Go ahead and plant them. Germination rate probably goes down. So you might get a 30% germination rate instead of an 80% germination rate. But many seeds last a long time if they're stored well. When they start to germinate, you've given them the conditions they need to germinate. You've given them some water. Sometimes they require light. You've given them what they need. The very first thing that breaks out of that seed coat is a little part called a radicle. The radicle is the baby root. The root comes out first. And the chemistry that's going on as that radical comes out is unique. It is different from the chemistry later on and in other parts of the body. And we have understood that well enough that we have some chemicals that will interrupt that germination and basically kill that radical as it tries to come out. Do you know there are some chemicals that you can put, they're called pre-emergent herbicides, that basically you put them out in the fall and your little weeds never sprout, or you have them, some of them are even incorporated into mulch, and it says, prevents weeds. There are chemicals that act right there, right on that radical, right on this little root as it comes out, and kills that plant right there. And so that's why that's important. If you wait and put that same chemical out after the plant is up and you can see them, it's too late. You wasted your effort there. Pre-emergent herbicides are really tricky to use. Putting them out at the right time and in the right place so that they kill what they're intended to kill, that's all about it. And another thing is this. If you're trying to establish a seed bed where plants are reseeding themselves and you don't have to replant them every year, you sure can't use any of those weed and seed or pre-emergent herbicides, because you'll be killing your babies at the same time you're killing your weeds.
Someone gave me a butternut squash.
Yeah.
I cut open yesterday.
And some of the seeds are already sprouting.
yes, I was like, ooh.
It's okay. It's okay. I grew some really good. I grew some really good pumpkins this year from some seeds that were doing that. I had adopted a particularly ugly pumpkin from the pumpkin patch last year, and I set it in a spot that it didn't rot right away. And this spring, I gave it a good kick, and it, and there were all kinds of little babies going on in there, and I planted some of them and got some. None of the babies looked like the mother, though. It was one of those real warty, weird-looking kinds. Mm. They just looked like pumpkins. Okay. The hypocotyl is the baby stem. The plumule are the baby leaves, and the epicotyl is the baby stem above the cotyledons. And the cotyledons are these two pieces right here. Think about a bean. You kind of break it open into two pieces. When you plant monocots and dicots, most of the nourishment for that plant for the first 10 days or so is stored food that was in that seed. And if you watch your seedlings, if they come up and they have two symmetrical leaves to begin with, those are the cotyledons. Dicots actually bring their cotyledons up out of the soil, and they turn green and they act like leaves for a few days, and then they just fall off. But by that time the plant's already growing. Monocots, when they sprout, there's one little stalk coming up, not two. So you can tell monocots from dicots from the day they come out of the ground. Germination is sensitive to the environment, and so that's why some seeds require a lot more care than others. There's processes that we use in certain situations. One is called stratification. That's where you simulate winter by doing something like putting your seeds in a wet paper towel, putting it in a Ziploc, and putting it in the refrigerator for so many weeks. It thought it went through winter. Another is scarification, a real hard seeds. It's sometimes clipping or sandpapering. The seed coat will help germination. Bluebonnets seed, a lot of times when you buy good quality bluebonnet seeds, they've already been scarified to make the germination rate better. So sometimes if you're trying to grow something, it's worthwhile doing a little research to see, do they need any special care? Some of them do. Okay, so celebrate diversity. I just had to put that picture in. I had a rose bush right outside my bathroom window, and this little cardinal started building a nest. And I know how, if you've ever seen a bird nest, how, all the stuff goes around in a circle in that little cup. I know how that's done.
Aw.
I got to watch. She lays one piece across the top, she hops on it with her little feet, and then she starts to dance.
Oh.
And by the time she's twirled around, that leaf, that little pine needle, is going around like this. And she goes off, gets another one, does her little dance.
Oh my God.
That was
That's
fun.
so cool.
It was. It was
It
like,
is very cool.
yeah.
She's great.
This part here, there's going to be some things in here that hopefully we can almost skip over because you will have heard a lot about them in one of your other classes.
Okay.
But we'll just see. But hopefully, this is some of the stuff that will be reviewed.
Okay.
All right? Okay. Plant physiology is where we study how plants function, not how their body is built, but how they work. And it is pretty tricky. And I mean, there are Nobel Prizes for people who have done studies. So I guarantee you there are a lot of details that I don't know. And so we're hitting some just big ideas. But there are a lot of practical applications in this. And the more about it you know, first of all, the more amazed you become at how plants operate. And you can do a better job of taking care of your plants. And you do a better job of picking the right ones in the first place. Okay. If you work with plants for any length of time at all, you will probably see them doing things that you don't understand. And being as smart as you are going to have questions in your head. How does that work? Or why do they do that? Here's just a few examples. Why are some plants cold hardy and others are killed by a light frost? We haven't had our first frost yet, but it won't be long. And from your experience, you know how that first frost affects some plants, kills them dead. Others, they're hurt, but they're not dead. And then a lot of native plants, it's like nothing ever happened. Okay? How come? How does that work? Why do some plants germinate only after a fire burns their ground? We don't see that quite as much here, but maybe you've heard up in Colorado or someplace like that. There's a plant called fireweed, and it's beautiful, and it only grows after a fire. How's that? Why doesn't fire kill everything? Why do sunflowers face the sun throughout the day? Because they do. If you ever had the opportunity to travel somewhere and seen an entire field, 100 acres of nothing but sunflower, they are all pointed the same direction. If you come back later that day, they are all pointed in a new direction. But they're all together on it. How is that possible? Why do shoots grow up and roots grow down? Why don't they ever get confused? How is it that a plant understands gravity? How do plants know when to bloom? How do they coordinate with that? Let's take those plants where the male and the female are on two different plants. What if they didn't bloom at the same time? What if the bees could visit a male flower and the female was going to be there in 2 weeks? You know, how are these coordinations arranged? I'm always more full of questions than I am of answers. There's so many things that you see that you're going to say, I wonder how that works. I wonder why that is. And when you find the answers, you're always amazed. Understanding physiology can work to the advantage of a gardener because differences between plants can lead to different responses to chemicals. We've given several examples of that already. I'll give you a final example of that, perhaps. There is a very popular herbicide that does not kill grass and does a very good job of killing a long list of plants that are dicots that we call weeds if they get into our hayfield. So it's a very popular herbicide. And it's also a very persistent chemical. It does not break down quickly at all. It is incorporated into the body of the grass. Guess what happens if you use that hay to mulch your vegetables?
You don't have any vegetables.
You certainly don't have any tomatoes. Tomatoes are more sensitive to herbicide damage than anything else you are likely to grow. So you might get away with putting that hay that's got grazon in it on your onion beds, but you better not put it on your tomatoes. And I don't mean just this year. You better not use it next year either. If you're going to use that hay to mulch your garden, you better wait 3 years. And then you better hope that you don't still do damage with it. Okay? Understanding the processes can aid in the selection of appropriate specimens. You've got a particular plant that you'd love to grow, and it loves acid soil. And you do the right thing, because all master gardeners know that first you do a soil test, right? And you check the spot, and you find out that your soil is alkaline in that place. All right, what you gonna do? The plant loves acid soil. You want to plant it in alkaline soil. What's the best thing to do? You know what the best thing to do is? Plant something else. Plant something else. It is hard to really change the pH of soil. And plants care. And if you are a glutton for punishment, yeah, you can plant your azaleas in alkaline soil and treat them twice a year and pray. Or you can plant something else, okay? And it's all in understanding the process. Management decisions based on physiology are cost effective and save labor. And I'm all for that.
Work smarter, not harder.
Oh yeah. The molecules of plant life. This is kind of how we're going to go through this. Here's the list, and we're going to hit these things, some hard and some not so hard. We're going to start with water, talk about minerals, then carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. It's going to sound like a cooking class for a little while. Pigments, secondary compounds, plant hormones, and DNA. Okay. Now, this is where I hope that we can kind of go fast through this because you've had it already. So tell me. Okay, plants use water. Water moves through cells by osmosis. Here's the rule of osmosis. Water moving through a membrane from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Water always moves through a membrane from where it's concentrated to where it's less concentrated. And in large cases, that means from the soil and into the plant. The pressure of water within a cell, what we call turgor pressure, contributes support to tissues. Remember that picture of the cell, and the center of the cell was full of water. That water was pushing on the side of the cell. Well, that's mechanical support. That's like blowing up a tire. So water is important in providing support for the plant. Water clings to itself, and it also clings to the interior surface of xylem cells. Old xylem cells are hollow, just like straws, and water clings to the inside of those xylem cells. And the water in xylem is going from the soil upward, and it's carrying minerals with it. And how strong is that pull? Think of a sequoia tree. Have you ever had a chance to see one? Oh my goodness, the tallest tree in Texas doesn't even come close, okay? And yet water gets all the way to the top by the power of the water clinging to itself and clinging to the cells and pulling all the way to the top. So water carries dissolved minerals upward in the xylem up, and dissolved carbohydrates going down, flowing down. That is a cross section through a leaf. That picture, just think of you've got a shrub or one of these, and you've sliced that leaf from top to bottom, and you're looking at the edge of it. There's the upper surface of the leaf, and there's the bottom surface of the leaf, and those are all the cells. Well, actually, a leaf has got a lot of air in it. There's a lot of space inside of a leaf. It's not solid cells. Water is acquired through the roots. Water moves upward through the xylem tissue. Water enters the leaf where some of it is needed for photosynthesis. And if there is surplus water, it's going to evaporate into all of these spaces. And eventually, it's going to get out of the leaf. Because on the bottom side of the leaf, there are little pores, there are little openings. So that's the movement of water through the plant. If you look at the bottom of a leaf under the microscope, you can see these little portholes in the bottom side of the leaf where air can go in and out and water vapor can go in and out, and the name of that process is evapotranspiration. It's more than just evaporation. It's from the body of the plant. It's called evapotranspiration. And to just give you an idea here, this is a wonderful variety of ornamental pepper called black pearl. And I grew it several years ago in a container. And hot summer, forgot to water it. And because it was growing in a container, it didn't have a lot of soil. And it got dry and it wilted. And I mean, it looked like it was gonna die. So, when I found it like that, of course, I watered it immediately, okay? Well, I got to it in time. The water was absorbed by the roots, went up the xylem, back out into the leaves, and all of the cells that had just about collapsed because they had lost all their water plumped back up. So, 1 hour.
Wow.
Wow.
1 hour from here to there.
Was
1
happy.
hour.
Very happy.
And I was very happy.
Yeah.
I was very happy. Because these things are like $7 for 12 seeds. You know, so it was like, oh yeah. Yeah. So, and they don't breed true, so you can't save the seeds and get the same thing next year. You get to spend $7 again. Yeah. Okay. Now, another thing that happens with some of your diseases, particularly the ones that are caused by bacteria, the bacterial growth plugs up the xylem. And okay, what's going to happen to that area of the plant if the xylem gets all plugged up? Well, you're going to get this. That's a wilt disease. Okay? So the movement of water has to be constant. There is a condition, if I hadn't found this until the next day, it would have reached a condition known as permanent wilt. Permanent wilt. That's what you call it. Permanent wilt. Even if I had watered it, it wouldn't have mattered. It'd been too late. Because by that time, all the little root hairs are dead. And the little root hairs can't pick up any water, even though there's water there. Okay, plants use minerals. Tell me if your soils guide didn't cover this pretty thoroughly. You have some things that you need a lot of, and you call them macronutrients, and that's your NPK. You probably got a pretty good lesson on NPK and fertilizers when you look at the numbers on a bag of fertilizer, 10, 15, 10, or whatever. That's nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are your macronutrients. You need a lot of them. The ones that you don't need much of are micronutrients. It's a long list, but you don't need much of any of them. Now, elements must often be in certain compounds, or it doesn't matter. Nitrogen is the best example of that. Nitrogen is in the air. Nitrogen is the most common gas in the air. But it doesn't matter. A plant can be nitrogen deficient growing in air that's 78% nitrogen. Because in order for the plant to use nitrogen, it has to be in a particular nitrogen compound. Okay? Elements must often be in, also pH. The pH of the soil has to be right, or a plant may not be able to absorb it. You probably saw a little chart that showed pH and then different minerals, and the big takeaway from that chart was that you got to be approximately neutral for most minerals to be available. If it's too acid or too basic, the mineral can be there, but the plant can't use it, can't pick it up. Okay. Now, why is this all an important thing with water? Is that all of these things have got to dissolve in water to get into the plant. All of these things have got to be a water-soluble thing. And they've got to get into the plant in a structurally reasonable way. What part of the plant is built for absorbing these things? The roots. No other body part of a plant is designed to absorb stuff. Leaves are not designed to absorb minerals. Their ability to do it is very limited. So, in most cases, where's the best place to put fertilizer? Around the roots. Spraying it on the top of the plant may or may not be very effective.
So foliar fertilizer is pretty much not as good.
It's very hyped.
Okay.
Okay? A lot of people make a lot of money selling foliar fertilizers.
Okay.
Okay? I'm not saying that it doesn't work at all. I'm not saying I haven't used some with some success.
Gotcha.
But I think it is it is an opportunity for people to oversell the advantages of a product and make a lot of money off of gardeners. I get my fertilizer in a sack, put it on the ground. I've often heard if you want to spend $10 wisely on your garden, put $9 on the soil. Okay? Okay. Another real important point. Plants can't distinguish the source of the nutrients they absorb. The plant does not have an ethical mind saying, I only want nitrogen from manure. I do not want nitrogen to come from a factory. I don't want that. The plant does not have that ability. We as gardeners make moral and ethical choices about products we use, but to a plant, it's either getting what it needs or it isn't. Okay? So that's the gardening application of it. Again, we encourage organic gardening, but not because the plant has a moral obligation. Carbohydrates. Plants build carbohydrates from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbohydrates, and if you pay any attention to what you eat, you probably are familiar with the word carbohydrate, and we eat way too many of them. Yes, yes. Carbohydrates include compounds known as sugars, starches, and by the way, cellulose. Okay? Carbohydrates are used by plants for building their bodies and for energy. They make carbohydrates to build their bodies because they can make cellulose, and cellulose is cell wall, so if a plant's going to grow, it's going to build a lot of cellulose to build up its own body. It's also going to make sugars for energy, and starch, because starch is a great way to store sugar. So that's what a plant is going to do. Light is the source of energy for almost all life on Earth. Okay? Huh?
Those are those yours?
Yeah.
Oh, so
I
pretty.
had to put a picture of the donkeys in here somewhere. Okay. Photosynthesis is the mechanism plants use to capture light energy and form carbohydrates. Photosynthesis also affects Earth's atmosphere because carbon dioxide is captured and oxygen is released. Plants through photosynthesis are the foundation for almost all food chains on Earth. That's not a picture of donkeys, that's a picture of food chain. Okay, food chain. Plants, animals, food chain. Okay. Have you heard the expression carbon sequestration or carbon capture? Carbon capture. The idea that we have too much carbon dioxide, it's accumulating, it's a greenhouse gas, we need to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. A way to do it is to put it in compounds, and plants are good at doing that, so we need to save the rainforest and all of that. Carbon sequestration is just a fancy way of saying that plants have the ability to take carbon dioxide out of the air and put it into a compound so that it is no longer circulating and being a greenhouse gas. And yes, tropical rainforests are good at it. So are cornfields. So are temperate forests. Plants are just good at that. It's what they do for a living.
So's grass.
Grass is great, yeah. Bare dirt is not good. Okay, here's the big equation. Water plus carbon dioxide plus light energy yields glucose, which is a sugar, and oxygen. Now, think about this marvelous thing. Imagine that you had a bowl of water and it's sitting in the air, which is a source of carbon dioxide. And you put that bowl of water into the sunshine and you wait a while. Is it going to turn to sugar? No. But a plant can do it. A plant can take water in the air with the sun shining on it and turn it into sugar. And that's why you could argue that this is the most important equation in the world. Every plant can do that. Okay, how does it manage that? Well, the wonderful equipment for the process is mostly in the leaf. Yeah, there's a few green stems, but basically we're talking about something going on in leaves. And we got the light coming in from the sun. We got carbon dioxide entering the leaf through those little stomata, those little pores on the back side of the leaf. Carbon dioxide can get in. Water is coming up from the ground to the roots, to the stem, up through the xylem. And then this happens. This miracle right here happens. And once it's done, the oxygen is going to be returned to the air. And the glucose, the sugar that's made, a lot of it is going to be moved down through the phloem to other parts of the plant. And all of that is going to happen right there in the leaf of that plant, in those chloroplasts. It doesn't happen in one step. We write it as that equation as if, boom, it just happened. It doesn't happen in one step. It doesn't happen in two. It happens in dozens. And the guy that figured out how it works got the Nobel Prize for it. So, trust me, there are a lot of tiny details, okay? But basically, it's like this. In the first step, light, and this is usually sunshine, but it could be fluorescent lights in your home. It's light. The energy of that light is trapped. It's stored for a tiny moment, and then it is used to break apart a molecule of water. And you know water is H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. It does not spontaneously come apart. But this energy from the sun is used to break a water molecule. Now, it's broken into hydrogen and oxygen, and the plant doesn't need the oxygen. It's a byproduct. Doesn't want the oxygen. Turns it loose, sets it free. The oxygen off into the atmosphere. Good for us. Plants don't care. The hydrogen is what they want. They take the hydrogen and they add it to carbon dioxide. Now we've got hydrogen, carbon, oxygen. Now we can make a sugar. And that's our second step. The hydrogen is added to carbon dioxide and makes that simple sugar that we call glucose. And that's photosynthesis right there. Now, where does it happen? Usually in a leaf, in those little green things. Those little green things called chloroplasts. And if you were looking at a leaf under a microscope, it might have several hundred in each cell. If you looked at each one in detail, you find it's green because of this chemical, chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is a big molecule, but right there in the center of the chlorophyll molecule is 1 magnesium and 4 nitrogens in a cute little network arrangement. Now, what happens if you're trying to grow a plant on soil that's deficient in nitrogen? What's that plant going to look like?
It's going to be pale because it's not going to have the green because it doesn't have the nitrogen.
It cannot be as green as you want it to be. It's going to look yellowish. It's not going to have a rich, healthy green look. It's going to be pale. It's going to be yellowish. And what kind of fertilizer do you need?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen. Nitrogen. And if you put nitrogen fertilizer on a field that needs it, the results are within a few days. It will look all good. Sometimes it looks so good it's almost bluish. It's so green. Because you gave it the nitrogen it needed. Well, now what about magnesium? Do you have to have some? Well, yeah. But the difference is, it is very, very rare for soil to be deficient in magnesium. Very rare. So, chances are, if you don't have enough chlorophyll, it's a nitrogen deficiency. That's common. Magnesium deficiency, very rare. When you have your soil test, you brought soil and you got your soil test. You got your results back? Okay. Did they just get the $10 test or did they get the big?
No, they just got the basic.
Okay,
routine
your
test.
basic test was for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pH, calcium,
Calcium, I believe it does test for magnesium.
magnesium, a few things. If you want to know everything in your soil, you can find that out, but you know, it's a little bit more. Look, a lot more. It's like $40 or so. But most of the time you don't need to worry about it because all those other things are very seldom a problem. Magnesium, a commercial way to buy magnesium is Epsom salts. And Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. And every year this goes around the internet. Put a handful of Epsom salts in with every one of your plants that you put in your garden. Well, what that is here. If magnesium is deficient in your soil, would that help?
Sure.
Yeah, it would. If magnesium is deficient, that would help. What if magnesium wasn't deficient in the first place?
Then you don't need to add it.
It wouldn't matter. You don't need to add it. So, every time I see that, it's like, have you had a soil test to see that you're deficient in magnesium? Have you had a soil test? Are you doing that because you had a soil test?
Because Facebook said it.
You know, otherwise you're just, you know.
that said it, yeah.
Yeah, I love Facebook, but some, this is a boy pepper and a girl pepper. No, it's not. Okay. Okay, we've talked about all that. Moving on. Glucose and beyond. Glucose. The formula for glucose is C6H12O6. All right. Glucose is found in both the plant and the animal kingdom. Glucose is also blood sugar. All right. You can take a 6-carbon sugar and fasten it onto another 6-carbon sugar, and you get a 12-carbon sugar. Okay? You can do that over and over and over. And you can build some gigantic molecules, just like you can build a brick wall if you have enough bricks. One way you can put glucose together is simply two simple sugars, 2 6-carbons, and make a 12. The most common 12-carbon sugar is what's all over those donuts over there. It's called sucrose. We have a real good ability to taste it. Tastes real good, okay? Some plants are real good at making it, and we have figured out how to extract it. So sugar cane in the south and sugar beets in the north, which sugar beets are not similar to the beets that we grow in a vegetable garden at all. But they're a good example of a double sugar, 12-carbon sugar. But if you really want to keep building, you build that brick wall one way and you have created starch. You build it a slightly different way and you have created cellulose. Okay, starch is a good way to store energy in a plant because it's easy to build and it's also easy to tear apart. So you can build it and tear it apart you can move it as glucose and rebuild it. So let's say we were making a lot of glucose, and let's say we're a sweet potato vine. We can move that glucose down to the root area, assemble it into a starch, store it there until next spring when we need it, and break it down. It's a great way for plants to store energy. So we find starch in roots, we find starch in seeds. But the plant didn't put it there for us. The plant put it there for itself, for its next generation, for its children. Cellulose, the plant built it for itself. That's cell walls. Now we eat this stuff. When we eat starch, we're very good at digesting it. Very good. Digesting starch begins right here in our mouth. We start digesting starch. We're good at it. We can't digest cellulose at all. As human beings, we don't digest cellulose. Yet, we eat a lot of it. You know, you munching on some celery, think of those cell walls you're crushing and eating. And you're not going to digest any of it. Why eat it?
Roughage.
Yeah, we have another name for it. Fiber. Okay? Fiber. We're not any good at digesting cellulose. But it keeps things moving. It's good for you. That's good for you. The plant used it to build its body. And we eat it partly because we like it, you know, partly because we enjoy some of the things that are high in cellulose. But it's nutritionally good, but the calories in it don't count because you can't digest it. There are some animals that eat a high cellulose diet that are able to get energy from it. Not because they can digest it, but because in their gut they have organisms that can digest it, and they give those organisms a nice place to live. Think of a cow eating grass or hay. The cow has a particular area in its gut devoted to breaking down cellulose, and the cow helps it along by chewing it real good. But what happens if something happens in those bacteria in that gut aren't getting good nutrition? Then the cow can't get any nutrition out of that hay because that hay's going to go right through them and no good. No good. So if you're thinking of animals that eat a lot of high plant diet, then you look at how their gut operates. They've got some adaptation that you don't have because that same stuff would go right through you. Okay? Plant proteins. Now we're getting away from photosynthesis and we're moving now to proteins. Now, proteins in animals, in our bodies, proteins are of two basic types, and one is contractile proteins. Proteins that are in the muscles that cause us to move. Most of the protein in the body of an animal is in the muscle tissue. The rest of it is enzymes. Enzymes make chemical reactions happen better, and there happen to be proteins. Well, now plants have no muscles. So the main thing that a plant protein is an enzyme, something that makes chemical reactions happen better. So if you're trying to represent what percentage of the body of an organism is protein, an animal, the percentage is going to be real high because of all that muscle. But the percentage of protein in a plant is going to be very low. Very low. And this is important if you are trying to have a diet with no animal product in it. You're going to have a challenge getting enough protein. Can be done, but you have to think about it. Most plant proteins are enzymes. All proteins are made of building blocks called amino acids. And there are about 20 different amino acids that you put them to, kind of like that brick wall. You put them together this way or you put them together that way. Almost no plant proteins have all the different ones that exist. Animals do. Animal protein, and I don't care whether it's from fish or poultry or beef or whatever, all of those amino acids are there. But when you look at plant proteins, some of those amino acids are probably missing. Good thing is that some plants are missing this one and other plants are missing that one. If you know that, you can eat the right things together and you're fine, as long as you eat enough of them. But it's a bigger challenge to understand plants to the point that you can eat nothing but plants than it is to eat animal product. Differences between monocots and dicot enzymes are important in designing herbicides. We've talked about, how some herbicides will hit monocots and some will hit dicots and all. It's because of the enzymes. So that goes back to the family of proteins as explaining, what is the difference, and it's the proteins. Another very important family is the lipid family, and that's fats and oils and waxes. The lipid family of chemicals gives plants the ability, for one thing, to have an anti-dehydration chemical, and it's like a wax, and you find it on stems, and you find it on usually the top surface of leaves. It makes them shed water. You'd find a real good layer of it on a cactus. So that's a way that they use a wax material. Oil, plants put a lot of oil in seeds because it's high in calories. It's a high energy thing. They can store a lot of energy for the next generation by putting some oil in a seed. So we figured that out, and we figured out how to get the oil out of those seeds. So think about all of the different plants that we get a significant amount of oil from. You go to the grocery store, what kind of oils can you buy?
Olive oil,
Olive oil, vegetable oil.
Olive,
coconut,
coconut,
Sunflower.
canola.
Flour.
canola, peanut. And each of these have different advantages in your kitchen. If you're a good cook, and you probably have several different ones. And you fry your turkey in the peanut oil, don't you? You don't fry your turkey in the olive oil. That would be a mess. Now, coconut's kind of a different thing. Coconut is actually a fat. The difference between a fat and an oil physically has to do with whether it's a solid or a liquid at room temperature. If it's a solid, we call it a fat. If it's a liquid, we call it an oil. And with coconut, if you've ever had a jar of coconut oil, you know that during the summertime it's a liquid, and in the wintertime it's a solid. And if you make some nice homemade salad dressing and you put it in the refrigerator, when you pull it out it's a mess because all of the olive oil has solidified, and you have to wait for it to come to room temperature before you can use it. Very few plants make fats. Palms and coconuts, about the only ones. Some oilseeds are of economic importance, and you've mentioned some of them. Plant pigments. We've already talked about the most important pigment, and that is chlorophyll. But there are a lot of other plant pigments because you think about flowers and autumn leaves. There's a lot of other colors that plants have. And some of these colors do help in photosynthesis. But most of them don't. Most of them have nothing to do with photosynthesis, and we would just say they're just for pretty. But it's not for pretty for us, it's for pretty for getting that bug to come pollinate it, and then we figured out how it works. The genetics of color inheritance it's fun, and it's pretty well studied. It's pretty well studied. Plant hormones. In an animal, a hormone. Which way was going?
Is it police or fire?
Ambulance and police behind him, so
Uh-oh.
I don't know.
That's a wreck.
That's rare that they go at the same
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That way?
Yeah. Yeah, that bridge is so dangerous right now. You
It
know,
was
you-
dangerous before they tore
You're
it.
right.
Oh, yeah.
But now that construction, people don't see it, and they come over that hill, and you're stopped, and you're just like,
Like, you know,
yeah.
if you've ever been rear-ended, and I have,
Yeah.
it's a helpless feeling.
What was
Yeah.
the noise before? Was it a sirens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have different things, like, but 4 is
There's a
like
code,
a terrorist attack, and
There's a
3
code. There's
is
a
something,
code,
and
yeah.
2 and 1.
Yeah, and then
Anyway.
they blow it for, I guess, just for test. Okay, plant hormones. In animal hormones are chemicals that are made in one part of the body, they go through the blood to another part of the body, and they make something happen. All right? So you in your body, you've got, you can diagram and point to this hormone is produced here, and that hormone is produced there. This is what this one does, and that's what that one does. That's how animals operate. But plants, they have chemicals that cause things to happen, but they're produced very close to where they're going to act. Maybe even in the same cell, or at least very close by. So there's no system for making a hormone in the root and have an effect on the flower. That's not how it works. They're not the same list, although there are a few chemicals in plants that if we take them into our body, they have some similarity and may produce some similar results to animal hormones. But for the most part, it's an animal list and a plant list. We don't understand this aspect of botany as well as some of the others. It's not rare for new discoveries to be made in the area of plant hormones. But there are some things that we can count on that we do understand pretty well, and one of them is the effect of, and this is strange, a gas that is a hormone to plants. And that hormone is ethylene. Have you ever done this or heard of doing it? You need a fruit to ripen fast, and you put it in a sack with hopefully another fruit that is already very, very ripe.
Or you just put bananas with stuff, and that's what I do.
Yeah, if you store a banana with something that needs to ripen up,
Yeah.
it will, and faster than it would just out on the counter. But you have to, they always say use a paper sack. And a paper sack is good because plastic, sometimes things get too damp and they mold. But ethylene is a gas that produces ripening. Have you ever thought about the fact that you go to the grocery store and there's this whole display of Roma tomatoes, and they're all perfectly evenly ripe? But when you grow tomatoes at home, they don't all ripen on the same day, do they? How do they do that? They pick them green, okay? And when the contract says they need so many tons of tomatoes for Texas, what would you do to bring those tomatoes all ripe on the same day to ship? Blast them with ethylene. All of a sudden, they're all ripe now. So that's one that we understand pretty well, and we make a lot of economic use, and it's a good thing. I mean, when I want some tomatoes, I want to go to the grocery store and buy them, right? Even though they do taste like cardboard compared to the ones that I can grow myself. Okay. Another one that you may have had some experience with when you did your plant propagation. Did you have the hormone powder that you dipped the cuttings in before you put them? Did you use some of the hormone powder? Okay. There are hormones that are involved with growth and reproduction and cell division, and that's become a commercial product that you can use. And it's very safe to use because there's nothing going on in your body that is related to it. So you're not going to sprout roots on your fingers just about from getting that stuff. Right. So plant hormones are an area of further interest and further research. It was good for a master's degree for my mother, so it's been studied for a long time. We did her master's thesis in our greenhouse on hibiscus with 5 or 6 different plant hormones, so it's studying plant hormones been around for a while. Okay. Growth toward light, ripening of fruit, development of roots on cuttings, those are the kinds of things. Related to life cycle regulation, when is it time to grow tall? When is it time to bloom? A lot of those things are triggered by light, but affected by hormones. The light causes cells to make hormones, the hormones cause the plant to flower or whatever they're needing to do. Secondary compounds. This is a category that we put things in when we don't know, when we don't understand them. We don't really know why they're there. We haven't figured them out. This is the junk drawer of plant physiology is secondary compounds. We do know every now and then we have to pull something out of the junk drawer because we now know so much about it that we really understand it. We notice that a lot of the things that we've got in that junk drawer taste bad. Some to the point of being toxic. What's the point of a plant being bad tasting? How can that be an advantage for the plant?
It's like a cactus. It has, instead of spikes, it has a bad taste.
Yeah.
Its mechanism.
It's a defense mechanism. Yeah. And sometimes we can actually figure out what it is and how it works. And sometimes we can even co-op it and make some use of it. Do you know any other name for this beast besides prickly ash or Hercules club? Tickle tongue.
Tickle tongue?
Tickle tongue. If you strip the bark of this and you put it in your mouth goes numb.
Ooh, Novalene.
So another name for it is toothache tree.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, toothache tree. Where does aspirin come from?
Willow.
Black willow. Yeah. We know a lot, and we, all over the world, we have a tradition of using plants for medicines. And some of them actually work. some don't. It's interesting to me. I read a lot about the Native Americans, and this tribe would use this plant for one thing, and this tribe would use that same plant for the exact opposite. It's like, a lot of it's probably the placebo effect. But on the other hand, there are some very definite things that work. Some of our best cancer treatments come from discoveries in plants. The flower that we call a vinca or periwinkle is grown as a row crop in Madagascar, and it's a source of a cancer drug. And we think of it as a flower bed plant, but actually it's a medicinal. Yew trees, which don't grow here, they're from up north, is a source of breast cancer, one of the breast cancer drugs. And a lot of times what we find is we'll find this effect, then we'll do the chemistry research and we'll figure out a way to do it in the lab, easier and cheaper than growing the plant, extracting it from the plant, but it's still, the plant is what gave us the idea. So there's a lot of validity to that.
Well, aren't the poppy seeds like from opium?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I
Yeah,
was thinking.
good and bad. Good and bad. I don't know how you stand on marijuana, but I've been up in Colorado enough to know that you want to make a fundamental change in the economy in some place, legalize marijuana. Last time I was up there, we were staying in a little motel, and talking to the manager of the motel. They could not get help to stay more than a week. They'd have to train somebody new. Why? Because the people on marijuana are unreliable employees. They said, we can't keep help anymore. All kinds of unintended consequences. If you've ever been to Colorado, it's a whole different place. Some are allelopathic, which means a plant that can kill other plants. Yeah. This is the way to keep your area for yourself. If your leaves are toxic to anything that might sprout underneath you. And black walnut is the classic example of that. If you happen to have a black walnut, do not compost those leaves.
How about cedar? Is that allelopathic or not?
I don't know how allelopathic it is, but the thing that cedar can do is to create such a shady area underneath it that nothing grows on. It also is a water hog.
Yeah.
So it makes the area underneath it dark and dry.
How about certain cactus? Yes? No?
Not that I know of. Ryegrass, somewhat.
Really?
That's one of the reasons why you do not see a lot of wildflowers on the side of the road where there happens to be a lot of ryegrass growing in. You can get almost a pure stand of ryegrass, and you almost lose your wildflowers.
Yeah.
The picture there, that picture is unfortunate. I didn't take that picture. That is a monarch on tropical milkweed. I wish it was a picture of a monarch on native milkweed. But the idea is the same. Some animals know how to eat toxic plants and use those chemicals, salvage those chemicals. Do you realize that a monarch is bad tasting to birds, so they leave it alone? They get that chemical when they're caterpillars. They keep it in their bodies, and they become a bad tasting adult. And then a bird tries a monarch, it's nasty, so they don't ever try a monarch again. And not only do they leave monarchs alone, they'll leave alone anything that looks like a monarch. It's a pretty good plan. I need to get a new picture with native, because don't plant tropical milkweed, plant native milkweed. If you can find it. Okay, there's just a little bit left, but this is something kind of cool that you might have a chance if you grow morning glories. That is a variety that I grew. It's called Grandfather Ott. It's an heirloom plant. It's a pass along plant. But that's 1 hour from the flowers being fully open, and then they start to fold up. They have 5 connected petals, and they go round the circle like that.
Oh, how cool.
And they end up all wadded up like that. And that is triggered by light. That's triggered by the amount of light. So on a shady day, morning glories stay open for a lot longer than they do on a bright sunny day. That's photoperiodism. The last thing to think about is DNA. This is the growing thing. This is the part of science, the part of biology that is pretty much overwhelming all other aspects of biology. And genetics really started in a very interesting way. There was a guy in Austria in the middle 1800s who wanted to study genetics, and he wanted to study mice. He was in a monastery, and they thought that studying mice would not be a very moral thing to do, because he would be making the mice breed. You know, he wanted to study that, and so they said, no, but you can raise plants in the garden. So he did, and he happened to choose garden peas, and he kept wonderful records that were lost, so we can't look back at them. And over a period of a number of years, Gregor Mendel worked out the basic rules for how things are inherited. All by himself, alone, with no prior anybody to build on. It was just straight out of his genius. And for the most part, he was accurate and right. And it's pretty amazing, because he studied 7 traits that turned out to be on 7 different chromosomes. And that matters, because when traits are close together, they're inherited in a different way. And how many chromosomes does a pea plant have? 7. So what are the chances that you would study 7 traits on 7 different chromosomes? You know, just worked out that way. Otherwise, he would have had results that were so confusing, he might never have figured it out. But he figured it out, and then nobody paid him any attention for years. For about 50 years, we neglected the implications of his research. If we had jumped right on it, we would probably have cured cancer by now. We just messed up by not paying attention to him right away. Plant and animal DNA, it turns out, is very, very similar. There is not much difference between plants and animals. A little more difference between bacteria and plants and animals. In recent years, we have done a tremendous amount of work on genetics because DNA was discovered. When I was starting college, DNA was like, guys, look at this. It was brand new. It had just been figured out. And one of the things that we wanted to do as soon as we could was, okay, let's figure out what the entire DNA profile is of a human being, or of someone. And it was like, oh, that's going to take us years and years. That's going to take us years and years. Now we can get the idea. We want to sequence the DNA in tickle trees, and they'd have it back next week. You know, that's how the technology has grown. In fact, this year, the Nobel Prize for chemistry went to two women. Now, women are much better represented in technical research, who did the development of the technology used to cut and move genes from one organism to the other. The technology is called CRISPR, and that's been recognized with a Nobel Prize. It's that big a deal. Most genetics research that we see on plants is on horticultural things. It is on agricultural things, not horticultural. We're a lot more interested in how can we grow better crops than we are, how can we make, more colorful petunias. So we do genetics research in horticulture, but most of it is ag dominated. You probably know genes are sections of DNA that code for traits, and they're on the chromosomes. And now here's some areas that maybe you don't know. Every organism has a certain number of chromosomes, and that's a characteristic of that kind of organism. There is a company that does genetics testing for people called 23andMe. Have you ever heard of that company? It's one of several, Ancestry and several of them. What is 23?
The number of chromosomes we have.
That's our haploid number.
Right.
As a human being. If I was one of my donkeys, it would be a different number. Okay? It would be 62. The normal number of chromosomes in either a pollen grain or an egg cell, an ovule, that number is called the haploid number. If you put them together, if you fertilize, if you take that pollen grain and you fertilize that egg cell, then you've got haploid plus haploid, diploid. Okay? If a pollen grain had 8 chromosomes in it, and the ovule had 8 chromosomes in it, once they get together, you've got 16. That's the number of chromosomes you're going to find in every cell in that plant that grows from that seed. Until it's time to make pollen or time to make eggs, and then there's a process for cutting it back down. If you didn't cut it back down, then every generation would have double the number. And plants and animals would have bazillion chromosomes. So that's the method of doing it, generation after generation. But we are able, through the amazement of chemistry, we're able to mess with that just a little bit. We can actually produce plants with extra chromosomes, extra sets of chromosomes. Instead of 2, which is called diploid, we can produce plants with 3 sets. Triploid, 4 sets, tetraploid. I just got through planting about 500, 600 pounds of tetraploid ryegrass. Okay? Why did I choose tetraploid ryegrass instead of just ordinary ryegrass? What would be a possible advantage to me?
More bang for your buck.
It will be. What kind of bang am I going to get for my buck?
You should get.
That ryegrass is for grazing. It's going to grow faster. The leaves are going to be wider. The plant will get a little taller. There's going to be more for my cows to eat. And whereas 10 years ago, it cost almost twice as much, now it costs like $3 a bag more.
Okay, I'm not to be negative, just to be questioning. Do they know what are there any effects? Are there any different side effects? Are there any things that are gonna come from it? No, it's just all gonna be,
All right, what's the difference between eating 2 apples and 1 apple?
okay,
In this case, it's 2 apples and 1.
okay.
It's double the number of chromosomes.
So it's not gonna genetically change anything else?
No,
Okay.
and because of that trick that they played on that plant to be that way, I won't get another generation out of it,
Okay. So you
They're-
have to do it with each.
I'll plant it
different
every
seed.
year. Yeah,
Okay.
you have to plant it every year.
Okay.
It does not reliably come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
No, that's a
question.
very important question and a very leading question, so thanks for the segue. It makes a lot of people nervous when you talk about making changes in genetic material. But when you think about it, what do you grow in your garden that is exactly the way the wild plant was thousands of years ago? Agriculture started about 10,000 years ago. We started domesticating plants and animals about 10,000 years ago. That's not very long. Okay? What do you have in your garden that's just like it was?
Probably nothing.
Just probably nothing. Probably nothing. A wild tomato plant. A tomato is this big. Okay? Potatoes. In South America, potatoes are native to South America. They have hundreds of varieties of potatoes. We have chosen a few that we really like. Every now and then we wish we had a potato with another color. We want some that are blue on the inside. Guess what? Go to South America, you can find them. Okay? You bring them up here. Well, what if you want to breed that blue-fleshed potato to a white one? All right? Are you okay with that? Maybe you can get a big blue potato instead of these little bitty naughty things that grow in South America. Yeah, we have changed our food tremendously by the very slow and random process of just watching for something we like and using that as our breeder. And over the years, watchful people have noticed things, and you can get maroon bluebonnets. If you watch, Mother Nature changes things at random and slowly. What we're able to do as geneticists now is to change things precisely and rapidly. And one of the things that we can do now, because of CRISPR, that we couldn't do 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we can choose exactly what we want to move and put it exactly where we want it to go. It's amazing what we can precisely do so that we can change things in a way that we intended and not in a random way. So, we have the technology. Some people don't think we should do it at all. Those people usually don't understand it, so they're afraid of it. People who understand it are more likely to say, it's got to be well monitored. We can't just turn this technology loose to do anything with it.
Yeah.
It's got to be supervised, tested, observed. And that's where we ought to be, is looking at what we can do, considering what we ought to do, and being realistic about it. Here's the progression. There's a bacteria that makes caterpillars get sick and die. It's a naturally occurring bacteria. We developed the technology for growing that bacteria in vast numbers and purifying that product and putting it on the market. You can go buy a can of a product that when you spray it in your garden, every caterpillar is going to die. Every caterpillar is going to get sick and die. Nothing else is going to be affected because it's caterpillar disease. Okay, you're willing to do that. You're willing to kill your caterpillars.
No, because I'm gonna kill the butterflies.
Oh, well, now this is your vegetable garden. This is not your butterfly garden.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you couldn't use this in your butterfly garden. No way. But your vegetable garden, these guys are eating your cabbage. I want my cabbage to not have holes in it. So I'm going to use that product. Okay. We figured out the mechanism for how that bacteria causes the disease. We studied the bacteria well enough to know what part of the DNA in that bacteria actually was the disease creator. We can pluck that DNA out and put it in a plant. That plant now kills its own caterpillars. And we don't have to use any insecticides. This plant itself is toxic to caterpillars. Not to anything else. Cow can eat it, you can eat it. You're not a caterpillar. You'll never know it's there. Okay? We've saved a step. We don't have to apply anything. That's what the technology has given us the potential to do. What if your cabbage could kill its own caterpillars? You know, save time and money. Yeah. So there are a lot of good opportunities there. Are there hazards? Yes. The people who developed all of this in the first place, this application, did a terrible job of helping the public understand why they were doing it, what the potential was. And GMOs, genetically modified organisms, got a real scary name. And they will probably never live it down. Final questions? Anything else?
Thank you for
If you will read, and I think it's like the first chapter or the second chapter of your handbook. Read it now if you haven't read it before. Read it now. A lot more of it will click. Okay?
Thank you for everything. I learned a lot.
It takes practice. It takes going back and looking. Now you know what you can know. So you can go look it back up when the question arises. And get on Facebook, plants and invertebrates if you want things identified, or Texas Flora if you want things identified. Stay away from the robots. They don't get it right.